Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Officer Michelle Hartley had always prided herself on being the kind of cop who noticed things others missed. It's what made her good at traffic stops. Catching the nervous tick of a driver with warrants, spotting the hastily hidden contraband, reading the micro-expressions that separated the innocent from the guilty. But on the morning of March 8, 2019, as she sat in her patrol car reviewing incident reports in the parking lot of the Millbrook Police Department in rural Oregon, she noticed something that would shatter her confidence in her own perceptions forever. The report was routine, a domestic disturbance call from the previous night, handled by Officer Derek Rodriguez. Standard procedure, nothing unusual, except Michelle had handled an identical call, same address, same complainant, same circumstances, exactly 1 week earlier. Not similar, identical. Word for word, detail for detail, down to the specific timestamps and the complainant's exact phrasing of her concerns about her neighbor's screaming matches that always end with something heavy hitting the floor. Michelle pulled up her own report from the week before, comparing the two documents side by side on her laptop screen. The complainant, Mrs. Eleanor Vance of 1247 Cedar Street, had called at exactly 11:42 p.m. in both instances. In both cases, she reported hearing a woman's voice crying for help, then silence, then what sounds like furniture being thrown around. Both Rodriguez's report and her own noted arriving at the scene to find no signs of disturbance. No answer at the door of the suspected address, 1245 Cedar Street, and no visible evidence of any altercation. Both reports concluded with the same notation: unable to establish probable cause for forced entry. Advised complainant to call back if disturbance resumed. The coincidence bothered Michelle enough that she walked across the bullpen to Rodriguez's desk. Derek was a solid cop, 5 years on the force, known for his thoroughness and attention to detail. When she showed him the reports, his reaction confirmed her suspicions that something was wrong. "That's weird," Derek said, scrolling through both documents. "I mean, domestic calls repeat, sure, but not like this. Look at this. Even the ambient temperature noted in both reports is identical. Same cloud cover. Same description of the complainant's demeanor." He paused, frowning at his screen. "Michelle, are you sure you wrote this report? Because I'm looking at the metadata, and it shows this was created on my computer, logged under my badge number." Michelle felt a chill that had nothing to do with the March morning air conditioning. She pulled up her own computer logs, showing Derek the entry she'd made the previous week. The system showed both reports existing simultaneously, authored by different officers but containing identical information, down to grammatical quirks and unusual word choices neither officer remembered making. "We need to talk to Sergeant Palmer," Michelle said. Sergeant Janet Palmer had been with Millbrook PD for 18 years, long enough to have seen every variety of administrative error, computer glitch, and human mistake the department could generate. But when Michelle and Derek presented their discovery, Palmer's expression shifted from mild interest to genuine concern. "Show me the call logs," Palmer said, pulling up the dispatch records. What they found made the situation more disturbing, not less. According to the system, Mrs. Eleanor Vance had indeed called twice, once the previous week, once the previous night, but the audio recordings of both calls were identical. Not similar voices saying similar things, but the exact same audio file, complete with background noise and timing patterns, listed under 2 different timestamps. "That's impossible," Palmer muttered, running the files through the department's audio analysis software. "These are supposed to be automatic recordings from 2 separate incoming calls. The system doesn't duplicate files." She paused the recording at several points, analyzing the waveform patterns. "These aren't just similar, they're digitally identical. Same file, same metadata, played through the system twice." Over the next 3 hours, the investigation expanded as Palmer, Michelle, and Derek began systematically reviewing recent incident reports. What they discovered defied rational explanation. Over the past 6 months, approximately 1 in every 15 calls had been duplicated. Not immediately, but with gaps ranging from 3 days to 2 weeks. Domestic disturbances, traffic accidents, noise complaints, welfare checks, all manner of routine police business was apparently recurring with impossible precision. The duplicated incidents weren't random. They followed a pattern that became clear only when Palmer mapped them chronologically. The time gaps between original and duplicate calls were decreasing. 6 months ago, duplicates appeared after 2-week intervals. Now, they were occurring within days of the original incidents. More troubling was the realization that officers were responding to these duplicate calls without recognizing them as duplicates, filing identical reports with no memory of having handled the same situation before. "How many of these duplicate calls have you responded to?" Palmer asked Michelle. Michelle spent the afternoon reviewing her own case files, finding 7 incidents over the past 6 months that were exact duplicates of earlier calls she'd handled. In each case, she had no memory of the repetition. Reading her own reports felt like déjà vu, but in reverse. Instead of feeling like she'd experienced something before, she felt like she was reading about experiences that belonged to someone else who happened to share her name and badge number. The breakthrough came when Derek suggested they contact Mrs. Eleanor Vance directly. If she had called twice about identical domestic disturbances, she might have insights into what was happening at 1245 Cedar Street. The conversation that followed introduced a new layer of disturbing complexity to their investigation. Mrs. Vance, reached by phone, insisted she had called only once, the previous week. She had no memory of calling the previous night and was confused by their suggestion that she had. When they asked about ongoing problems with her neighbors at 1245 Cedar Street, Mrs. Vance's confusion deepened. "Officers, there's no house at 1245 Cedar Street. That lot has been empty since the Hendricks place burned down 3 years ago. I called about strange noises coming from the empty lot, not from a house that isn't there." Palmer, Michelle, and Derek drove to Cedar Street that afternoon. The address they had both responded to, 1245 Cedar Street, was indeed an empty lot. No foundation, no debris, no signs that a structure had ever existed there. Mrs. Vance, watching from her porch, confirmed that the lot had been vacant for as long as she'd lived in the neighborhood. "Then what were we responding to?" Michelle asked, standing in the center of the empty lot where she distinctly remembered approaching a front door, knocking, and receiving no answer. That evening, Palmer initiated a comprehensive review of all duplicate incidents, dispatching teams to verify the locations and circumstances of every repeated call. The results were uniformly disturbing. In every case, officers had responded to addresses that either didn't exist, housed different residents than those described in reports, or involved situations that the supposed participants insisted had never occurred. Dr. Sarah Chen, the department's consulting psychologist, was called in to evaluate the officers involved. Her initial assessment suggested mass hallucination or shared delusion, possibly triggered by stress or environmental factors. But Chen's theory collapsed when she reviewed the dispatch recordings. The calls were real. The system had received them, logged them, and dispatched officers accordingly. The voices on the recordings belonged to people who claimed never to have made the calls, describing situations that provably had not occurred. "We're not dealing with officer perception issues," Chen concluded after a week of testing. "The system itself is generating these duplicate responses. But the system can't create false calls from real people about non-existent situations. This suggests something is interfacing with your emergency dispatch in ways that shouldn't be possible." The investigation expanded to include the department's IT contractor, Meridian Communications, which had installed and maintained Millbrook's dispatch system for the past 8 years. System Administrator Jake Morrison arrived on March 15th to conduct a comprehensive technical audit. What he found in the system logs would lead to the most disturbing revelations yet. "Your system has been receiving what I can only describe as echo calls," Morrison explained to Palmer and her team. "Every legitimate emergency call that comes through your dispatch is being duplicated and retransmitted through your system after a variable delay. But here's what makes no sense. The echo calls aren't coming from outside your system. They're being generated internally from within the dispatch hardware itself." Morrison's analysis revealed that the dispatch system was essentially talking to itself, creating perfect duplicates of previous calls and inserting them into the queue as if they were new emergencies. The technical impossibility of this process was compounded by the system's apparent ability to modulate the timing of these echoes, gradually decreasing the intervals between original and duplicate calls. "It's like the system is learning," Morrison said, reviewing 6 months of data. "The echo pattern is becoming more sophisticated, more immediate. Whatever is causing this is evolving." The most chilling discovery came when Morrison traced the origin point of the echo calls within the system. They were being generated from a hardware component that had been removed from the dispatch center 18 months earlier, a backup server that had suffered catastrophic failure and been replaced. According to department records, the failed server had been properly disposed of through the county's electronic waste management program. But according to the system logs, the non-existent server was still actively connected to the network, processing calls and generating responses. Palmer ordered an immediate search of the dispatch center, looking for any hardware that might explain the phantom server activity. They found it in the basement storage room. The supposedly disposed-of server, still connected to power and network cables, running silently in a forgotten corner behind boxes of old case files. The unit showed signs of severe damage: burned circuitry, melted components, and what appeared to be water damage. Yet it was fully operational, its hard drives spinning, its network interface actively communicating with the main dispatch system. "This thing should be dead," Morrison said, examining the damaged hardware. "Half the components are physically destroyed, but it's still processing data. And look at this." He pointed to the system's status display. "According to this readout, this server thinks it's been running continuously for 847 days. But we have documentation showing it failed and was disconnected 547 days ago." The implications were staggering. For the past 18 months, Millbrook's emergency dispatch system had been receiving and responding to calls from a server that existed in a state that defied technical explanation. Simultaneously destroyed and operational. Disconnected yet networked. Disposed of yet present. Dr. Chen returned to conduct additional psychological evaluations, this time focusing on the temporal disorientation experienced by officers responding to duplicate calls. Her findings suggested that the officers weren't simply forgetting previous incidents. They were experiencing a form of temporal confusion, where their memories of handling situations were being overwritten by subsequent identical experiences. It's as if their brains are defaulting to the most recent version of events, Chen explained. When they respond to a duplicate call, their memory of the original incident becomes inaccessible, replaced by the new, identical experience. But the original memory isn't deleted. It's archived somewhere in their subconscious, creating a growing psychological tension. This psychological tension manifested as increasing anxiety, sleep disturbances, and a general sense of unreality among affected officers. Michelle found herself questioning not just the duplicate calls, but her memory of all recent incidents. If she couldn't trust her recollection of routine calls, how could she trust any of her experiences? The case took an ominous turn when Morrison discovered that the echo pattern was accelerating beyond their initial projections. What had started as duplicate calls weeks apart was now generating echoes within hours. The damaged server was processing calls faster, responding more immediately, and apparently developing the ability to generate echoes of calls that hadn't yet occurred, dispatching officers to incidents that would happen later the same day. "We're seeing precognitive echoes," Morrison reported on March 20th. The system is now generating calls for incidents that happen 4 to 6 hours after the dispatch. Officers are being sent to addresses where they find nothing, then returning to the same addresses later to handle the actual emergencies that the system somehow anticipated. The precognitive echoes created a new category of psychological stress for the officers involved. Responding to a call for a domestic disturbance and finding nothing, only to return hours later to handle an actual domestic disturbance at the same address, created a sense of inevitability that several officers described as deeply unsettling. "It feels like we're not preventing crime or helping people," Officer Rodriguez explained to Dr. Chen. "It feels like we're just playing out scripts that have already been written, like everything we do has already happened, and we're just going through the motions." Palmer made the decision to disconnect the damaged server entirely, physically removing it from the building. The server's removal stopped the echo calls immediately, but created new problems. Officers found themselves unable to complete incident reports for calls they had responded to but couldn't clearly remember. The psychological impact of having their memories fragmented by the echo calls became apparent only after the artificial duplication ended. Michelle, reviewing her cases from the past 6 months, discovered that her memory contained gaps and inconsistencies that she couldn't resolve. She remembered responding to calls that had no corresponding paperwork and found reports she'd filed for incidents she couldn't recall handling. The boundary between her actual experiences and the system-generated echoes had become irretrievably blurred. The investigation's final phase involved determining the ultimate origin of the echo calls. Morrison's forensic analysis of the damaged server revealed something that challenged their understanding of the entire situation. The server had been generating echoes not for 18 months, but for the entire 8 years it had been part of Millbrook's dispatch system. The echo pattern they'd discovered in March was simply the point at which the delays had decreased enough to become noticeable. "This thing has been duplicating every call your department has received since 2011, Morrison explained. "For 8 years, you've been responding to echo calls without realizing it. The only thing that changed recently was the timing. The echoes were getting closer to the original calls." The implications were staggering. For nearly a decade, Millbrook's police officers had been responding to a mixture of genuine emergencies and system-generated duplicates. Their memories, their case files, their understanding of their own professional experiences had been contaminated by artificial events that felt completely real, because, in every measurable way, they were real. Dr. Chen's final assessment concluded that the echo calls represented a unique form of technological trauma. A situation where electronic systems had created false memories and experiences that were indistinguishable from reality. The affected officers required specialized treatment to help them distinguish between genuine and artificial memories, a process that proved partially successful at best. Michelle eventually requested a transfer to a different department, finding that she could no longer trust her own perceptions while working in the environment where the echo calls had occurred. In her final report, she wrote, "For 8 years, I thought I was protecting and serving this community. Now, I don't know which emergencies were real and which were echoes. I don't know which memories belonged to me and which were generated by a machine that was already dead. How do you do police work when you can't trust your own experience?" The Millbrook Police Department ultimately replaced their entire dispatch system and implemented protocols requiring multiple verification steps for all emergency calls. The damaged server was finally destroyed under controlled conditions, with Morrison and an FBI technical specialist confirming its complete physical destruction. But the psychological impact on the affected officers proved permanent. The echo calls had created a fundamental uncertainty about the nature of their experiences that extended beyond their police work into their personal lives. If a machine could generate false memories that felt completely authentic, how could they trust any of their perceptions? Dr. Chen's ongoing research into the Millbrook echo calls has contributed to new understanding of how technology can interfere with human memory and perception. Her work has influenced police training programs nationwide, emphasizing the importance of technological literacy and the psychological risks of over-reliance on electronic systems. For the residents of Millbrook, the echo calls remain largely unknown. The official explanation cited equipment malfunctions and administrative errors, avoiding the more disturbing implications of what had actually occurred. But for the officers who lived through those 8 years of artificial experiences, the case serves as a permanent reminder that in an age of ubiquitous technology, even our most basic assumptions about reality may be subject to digital manipulation we don't understand and can't control. The empty lot at 1245 Cedar Street, where Michelle and Derek had both responded to non-existent domestic disturbances, was eventually developed into a small playground. Children play there now, unaware that police officers once stood in the same space, knocking on the door of a house that had never existed, responding to calls from people who had never called, living experiences that were simultaneously real and artificial, genuine and echo. Officer Rebecca Hartwell had been working the Evidence Recovery Unit at the Phoenix Police Department for 3 years when she volunteered for the Experimental Memory Protocol Program in April of 2023. The program, developed in partnership with Arizona State University's Neuroscience Department, was designed to help officers overcome the psychological barriers that prevented them from accessing repressed memories of traumatic crime scenes. Using a combination of controlled pharmaceutical intervention and guided psychological techniques, the protocol promised to unlock witness testimonies and evidence details that traditional investigation methods couldn't recover. Rebecca's decision to participate wasn't driven by professional ambition. It was personal. 8 months earlier, she'd been first responder to a scene that haunted her, the murder of 6-year-old Emma Rodriguez in a Tempe apartment complex. Rebecca had discovered the child's body and spent 43 minutes securing the scene before backup arrived, but she could only recall fragments of those crucial first minutes. Medical examination suggested that the killer had been interrupted and might have left evidence during a hasty escape, but Rebecca's memory gaps prevented her from providing details that could be vital to solving the case. Dr. Michael Santos, the ASU neuroscientist leading the Memory Protocol program, had approached the Phoenix PD with a controversial proposition. Police officers suffering from trauma-induced memory loss could potentially recover suppressed details through controlled memory enhancement techniques. The program had shown promising results in laboratory settings, helping trauma victims recover detailed memories that had been psychologically buried due to extreme stress. Officer Hartwell represents an ideal candidate for the protocol, Dr. Santos explained to Captain Jennifer Chen, head of the Evidence Recovery Unit. She experienced acute psychological trauma that resulted in protective memory suppression, but the suppressed memories contain information that could be crucial for solving a serious crime. The protocol could help her access those memories safely while providing therapeutic benefits for her own psychological recovery. The memory protocol involved a 3-phase process conducted over several weeks in a controlled clinical environment. Phase 1 used mild pharmaceutical intervention to reduce the psychological barriers that prevented access to traumatic memories. Phase 2 employed guided visualization and hypnotic techniques to help subjects navigate suppressed memories systematically. Phase 3 involved detailed documentation and verification of recovered memories to ensure their accuracy and legal admissibility. Rebecca underwent extensive psychological evaluation before beginning the protocol, with Dr. Santos confirming that she was mentally stable enough to handle the stress of recovering traumatic memories. The evaluation also established baseline measurements of her current memory state, allowing researchers to distinguish between pre-existing memories and new recollections that emerged during the protocol. The first phase began on April 15, 2023, in a specialized laboratory facility at Arizona State University. Rebecca was administered a mild dosage of pharmaceutical compounds designed to reduce anxiety and increase neuroplasticity, essentially making her brain more receptive to accessing dormant memory pathways. The medications were carefully monitored to ensure they enhanced memory access without creating false memories or hallucinations. The pharmaceutical component isn't designed to create new memories, Dr. Santos explained. It simply reduces the psychological resistance that prevents access to existing memories. Think of it as removing barriers rather than adding content. During the first session, Rebecca was guided through relaxation techniques and asked to describe her general recollections of the crime scene. Under the influence of the pharmaceutical intervention, she found herself able to recall details that had been completely inaccessible during previous interviews. The specific position of furniture in the apartment, the pattern of bloodstains on the carpet, and most importantly, sounds she had heard from the apartment above while securing the scene. "I remember hearing footsteps upstairs," Rebecca reported during the session. "Heavy footsteps, like someone pacing back and forth. And I remember thinking it was odd because the apartment above was supposed to be vacant according to the building manager." This revelation was significant because the apartment above the crime scene had never been investigated. Building records indicated it was unoccupied, and initial canvas interviews hadn't identified any witnesses from that unit. Rebecca's recovered memory suggested that someone had been present in the supposedly vacant apartment during the time she was processing the crime scene. Phase 2 of the protocol began 1 week later, with Rebecca undergoing more intensive memory recovery sessions designed to access deeper levels of suppressed recollection. Using guided visualization techniques, Dr. Santos helped Rebecca mentally return to the crime scene and systematically explore her memories of those crucial first minutes. During the second phase sessions, Rebecca recovered increasingly detailed memories that had been completely inaccessible through traditional interview methods. She recalled seeing a shadow move past the window of the upstairs apartment, hearing what sounded like someone quickly moving heavy objects, and noticing that the building's rear exit door was propped open when she arrived, despite the fact that it was normally kept locked. "The memories aren't coming back as complete narratives," Rebecca explained to Detective Maria Vasquez, who was monitoring the sessions to evaluate their investigative value. "They're coming back as fragments, images, sounds, impressions that feel absolutely real but that I somehow couldn't access before. Detective Vasquez had been assigned to evaluate whether the recovered memories contained actionable intelligence that could advance the Emma Rodriguez murder investigation. Vasquez was initially skeptical about the reliability of memories recovered through pharmaceutical and psychological intervention, but Rebecca's recollections were providing specific, verifiable details that could be independently investigated. The most significant breakthrough came during Rebecca's fourth session, when she recovered a detailed visual memory of a vehicle she had seen leaving the apartment complex's rear parking area as she arrived at the scene. The memory included specific details about the car's make, model, color, and a partial license plate number. Information that had been completely inaccessible during previous interviews. "I can see it clearly now," Rebecca reported during the session. A dark blue Honda Civic, probably 2018 or 2019, with Arizona plates starting with AFJ. There was a dent in the rear bumper on the driver's side, and the driver was a white male, approximately 30 to 35 years old, wearing a red baseball cap. Detective Vasquez immediately ran the partial plate information through DMV databases, finding 17 vehicles that matched the description. Cross-referencing with criminal databases and geographic data, she identified 3 vehicles of particular interest, including one registered to Marcus Webb, a 32-year-old with a history of burglary arrests who lived 12 blocks from the crime scene. Officer Hartwell's recovered memories have provided us with our first concrete lead in the Emma Rodriguez case, Vasquez reported to Captain Chen. "We now have specific suspect information that we can investigate through traditional police methods." The investigation of Marcus Webb revealed that he had indeed been in the area during the time of the murder, had no verifiable alibi for the relevant time period, and had been employed as a maintenance worker at several apartment complexes in the area, giving him familiarity with building layouts and security systems. Phase 3 of the memory protocol involved detailed documentation and verification procedures designed to ensure that Rebecca's recovered memories were accurate and could be used as evidence in criminal proceedings. Dr. Santos worked with legal experts to establish protocols for memory recovery that would meet courtroom standards for reliability and admissibility. During Phase 3 sessions, Rebecca was asked to recall her recovered memories multiple times using different psychological techniques, ensuring that the details remained consistent and weren't being influenced by suggestion or expectation. The sessions were recorded and monitored by independent observers to verify that proper scientific procedures were being followed. The verification process confirmed that Rebecca's recovered memories were remarkably consistent and contained details that could be independently corroborated through physical evidence and witness testimony. Most importantly, the memories contained information that Rebecca couldn't have known through any means other than direct observation during the original crime scene processing. The consistency and specificity of Officer Hartwell's recovered memories strongly suggest that they represent accurate recollections of actual experiences rather than false memories created through suggestion or pharmaceutical influence, Dr. Santos concluded in his report. Armed with the information recovered through the memory protocol, Detective Vasquez obtained a search warrant for Marcus Webb's residence and vehicle. The search revealed physical evidence linking Webb to the Emma Rodriguez murder, fibers matching the victim's clothing, traces of her blood on shoes found in his apartment, and most significantly, items that had been stolen from the Rodriguez apartment during the murder. Webb's arrest and subsequent confession confirmed the accuracy of Rebecca's recovered memories down to specific details. He admitted to being in the apartment above the crime scene, watching through the floor as police processed the murder he had committed. His description of events matched Rebecca's recovered memories precisely, including his use of the rear exit door and his vehicle's departure from the rear parking area. Everything Officer Hartwell remembered through the memory protocol was completely accurate, Webb stated during his confession. I was upstairs watching her work the scene, trying to figure out if she had seen anything that would connect me to the murder. When she mentioned hearing footsteps and seeing my car, I knew the memory recovery had worked. Webb's confession provided crucial validation for the memory protocol program, demonstrating that the technique could recover accurate, detailed memories that were vital for solving serious crimes. The success of Rebecca's case led to expansion of the program and its adoption by other law enforcement agencies interested in accessing suppressed witness memories. However, the memory protocol also created unexpected complications for Rebecca and other officers who participated in the program. While the technique successfully recovered suppressed memories of traumatic events, it also enhanced officers' ability to recall other disturbing experiences from their careers, leading to increased psychological burden and stress. The protocol didn't just help me remember details about the Emma Rodriguez case, Rebecca explained to Dr. Santos during follow-up sessions. It opened up access to traumatic memories from other cases that I had suppressed. I'm now remembering details from crime scenes I worked years ago, and the psychological impact is significant. Dr. Santos documented that 73% of officers who participated in the memory protocol experienced similar effects: enhanced recall of traumatic memories beyond the specific incidents they were trying to remember. This created an ethical dilemma about whether the investigative benefits of the protocol justified the psychological costs to participating officers. We've successfully demonstrated that memory recovery can provide crucial evidence for solving crimes, Dr. Santos reported. But we've also discovered that the technique has broader psychological effects that we didn't anticipate. Officers who undergo the protocol may experience enhanced recall of traumatic experiences throughout their careers. Rebecca's case became a landmark example of both the potential benefits and risks of memory enhancement techniques in law enforcement. While her recovered memories led to the successful prosecution of Marcus Webb for Emma Rodriguez's murder, Rebecca herself required ongoing psychological counseling to manage the increased burden of traumatic memories that the protocol had made accessible. The Memory Protocol program continued with enhanced psychological support systems and more careful screening of candidate officers. Dr. Santos refined the technique to provide more targeted memory recovery that minimized unwanted psychological side effects while maintaining investigative effectiveness. Detective Vasquez, who had initially been skeptical about memory recovery techniques, became an advocate for the protocol after seeing its success in the Rodriguez case. She worked with Dr. Santos to develop training programs for investigators who needed to work with officers recovering suppressed memories. The memory protocol gave us the breakthrough we needed to solve Emma's murder, Vasquez stated in her final case report. But it also taught us that memory recovery is a powerful tool that needs to be used carefully, with full consideration of the psychological impact on the officers who volunteer to undergo the procedure. The success of Rebecca's case led to increased funding for memory recovery research and its application in cold cases where traditional investigation methods had been exhausted. The Phoenix Police Department established a specialized unit to work with memory recovery candidates and to evaluate cases where suppressed witness memories might contain crucial evidence. Captain Chen, who had initially been cautious about approving the Memory Protocol program, became convinced of its value after the Rodriguez case results. She implemented department-wide protocols for identifying cases where memory recovery might be beneficial and for supporting officers who chose to participate in the program. The Memory Protocol represents a new frontier in criminal investigation, Chen concluded in her report to the department administration. It allows us to access evidence that exists in officers' memories but has been made inaccessible by psychological trauma. When used appropriately, it can provide crucial breakthroughs in cases that might otherwise remain unsolved. For Rebecca, the experience of participating in the memory protocol was both professionally rewarding and personally challenging. While she was proud that her recovered memories had led to justice for Emma Rodriguez, she continued to struggle with the enhanced recall of traumatic experiences from throughout her police career. "I would participate in the protocol again if it could help solve another case like Emma's," Rebecca stated in her final interview with Dr. Santos. "But I understand now that memory recovery comes with psychological costs that officers need to be prepared for. We can't just focus on the investigative benefits. We need to consider the long-term impact on the officers who volunteered to recover suppressed memories." The Memory Protocol program continues to operate with enhanced safety measures and psychological support systems. Dr. Santos's ongoing research has led to more refined techniques that provide targeted memory recovery while minimizing unwanted psychological effects. Marcus Webb was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing hearing, Emma Rodriguez's family thanked Rebecca for her courage in participating in the memory protocol, noting that without her recovered memories, Webb might never have been identified and arrested. "Officer Hartwell's willingness to undergo memory recovery gave us the justice that Emma deserved," Emma's mother stated. "She risked her own psychological well-being to help us find the person who killed our daughter. We can never adequately thank her for that sacrifice." The case has become a standard example in law enforcement training programs of how emerging technologies and techniques can provide new investigative capabilities. It demonstrates both the potential benefits of memory enhancement in criminal investigation and the importance of carefully considering the psychological impact on officers who participate in experimental programs. Dr. Santos continues to refine the memory protocol and to research its applications in other areas of law enforcement and criminal justice. His work has contributed to new understanding of how traumatic memories are formed and stored, and how they can be safely accessed for investigative purposes. The Memory Protocol case taught us that human memory contains vast amounts of information that can be crucial for solving crimes, Dr. Santos observed. But it also taught us that accessing traumatic memories requires careful consideration of the psychological welfare of the individuals involved. We have a responsibility to balance investigative needs with the mental health of the officers who make memory recovery possible. For the Phoenix Police Department, the Memory Protocol program has become an important tool for solving cold cases and accessing evidence that traditional investigation methods cannot recover. The department continues to work with ASU researchers to refine the technique and to develop new applications for memory enhancement in criminal investigation. The case serves as a reminder that emerging technologies and techniques can provide law enforcement with new capabilities for solving crimes, but that these capabilities must be developed and implemented with careful attention to their impact on the officers who use them. The balance between investigative effectiveness and officer welfare remains a central concern in the ongoing development of memory recovery techniques. Rebecca Hartwell continues to work in the Evidence Recovery Unit, where she applies her experience with memory recovery to help other officers access suppressed memories that might contain crucial evidence. Her case has inspired other officers to consider participating in the Memory Protocol program, knowing that their recovered memories could provide justice for victims and their families. As Rebecca noted in her final interview, "The Memory Protocol showed me that our minds contain more information than we realize, and that sometimes the key to solving a case is locked away in memories we can't normally access. If my willingness to recover traumatic memories can help bring justice to victims like Emma Rodriguez, then the psychological costs are worth it. But officers considering the protocol need to understand that memory recovery changes you. It gives you access to traumatic experiences that you had learned to live without remembering. Dispatch operator Lisa Chen first noticed the anomaly at 3:17 a.m. on a quiet Thursday night in September 2020, during what should have been a routine shift at the Riverside County Emergency Communications Center in California. The center handled emergency calls for 12 municipalities across the county, operating with state-of-the-art equipment and serving a population of nearly 400,000 residents. Lisa had been working dispatch for 6 years, and she prided herself on being able to handle the most chaotic emergencies with calm efficiency. But the call that came through her headset that night would challenge everything she thought she understood about emergency communications. The call began normally enough, a 911 hang-up from a cell phone, which required callback protocol to ensure no emergency existed. Lisa dialed the number shown on her screen, 951-555-7829. The phone rang twice before being answered by a woman's voice that was distorted by what sounded like severe audio compression, as if the call was being routed through multiple relay systems. Riverside County 911. This is Lisa. We received a hang-up call from this number. Is everything okay? The response came through with unusual clarity, despite the underlying distortion. Thank you for calling back. I need to report a missing person. My daughter Sarah hasn't come home, and I'm very worried. Lisa followed standard protocol, gathering basic information. The caller identified herself as Margaret Donnelly, provided an address on Pine Street in the city of Moreno Valley, and described her 16-year-old daughter who had failed to return from school. Lisa was preparing to transfer the call to the appropriate local police department when something in the caller's voice made her pause and ask additional questions. Mrs. Donnelly, when did you last see Sarah? She left for school this morning around 7:30. She should have been home by 4, but it's now almost 8 p.m. and I haven't heard from her. Lisa glanced at her computer clock, which showed 3:19 a.m. Either Mrs. Donnelly was confused about the time, or there was a problem with the phone system's routing. Lisa asked the caller to confirm the current time. It's 7:53 p.m., Mrs. Donnelly replied with certainty. I've been calling 911 for the past 20 minutes, but I keep getting disconnected. Lisa checked her call logs, finding no record of previous calls from the number 951-555-7829. She also confirmed that her system was receiving the call at 3:19 a.m., not 7:53 p.m. as the caller believed. Assuming there was a technical issue affecting the caller's perception of time, Lisa proceeded with gathering information and transferred the call to Moreno Valley Police Department for follow-up. Detective Robert Valdez took the transferred call and immediately encountered the same temporal discrepancy. His computer showed the call coming in at 3:22 a.m., but Mrs. Donnelly continued to insist it was just before 8 p.m. More troubling, when Valdez attempted to verify Mrs. Donnelly's address on Pine Street, he found that no such address existed in Moreno Valley. Ma'am, I'm having trouble locating your address in our system. Can you provide some landmarks or cross streets near your home? Mrs. Donnelly's response added new layers of confusion to the situation. She described landmarks that had existed in Moreno Valley, but had been demolished or changed years earlier. A gas station that had been replaced by a shopping center in 2018, a restaurant that had closed in 2015, and a school that had been renamed in 2019. Donnelly, Detective Valdez asked carefully, "What year is it?" "It's 2017, she replied without hesitation. "September 14th, 2017. Detective Valdez's system showed the actual date as September 14th, 2020, exactly 3 years later than the date Mrs. Donnelly believed it to be. He continued the conversation, gathering as much information as possible while trying to understand what was happening. Mrs. Donnelly provided detailed descriptions of her daughter, her school, and her usual routine, all of which sounded completely authentic and consistent. After the call ended, Valdez contacted Lisa to discuss the unusual circumstances. Both agreed that Mrs. Donnelly had seemed genuine and distressed, not confused or attempting to perpetrate some kind of hoax. The technical aspects of the call were equally puzzling. The number 9515-557829 was active and traceable, but when Valdez attempted to call it back, he reached a recorded message stating that the number was not in service. Lisa decided to investigate the technical aspects of the call, contacting her supervisor, operations manager James Martinez. Martinez had 23 years of experience in emergency communications and had encountered every variety of technical glitch and unusual call scenario. But when Lisa played back the recorded call, Martinez's expression shifted from mild interest to genuine concern. "That call didn't come through our normal routing system," Martinez observed, analyzing the technical metadata. "The source identifier shows it originated from our own emergency center, but from a console that's been offline for maintenance since last Tuesday." Martinez pulled up the technical logs for the previous week, confirming that Console 7, the source identifier shown for Mrs. Donnelly's call, had been taken out of service for equipment upgrades and had not been operational during Lisa's shift. More puzzling, the call had been routed through backup systems that were only activated during major system failures or disaster scenarios. "According to our logs," Martinez explained, "this call was processed by emergency protocols that haven't been used since the 2018 wildfire season. The system treated this as a disaster-level emergency and activated backup routing through systems that shouldn't have been accessible." Lisa and Martinez spent the rest of the night investigating the technical anomalies, discovering that Mrs. Donnelly's call had triggered a cascade of automated responses designed for catastrophic emergencies. The system had attempted to establish contact with emergency management agencies, activated personnel recall protocols, and initiated resource allocation procedures as if responding to a major disaster. "The system thinks we're dealing with a county-wide emergency," Martinez reported. But the only triggering event was a single missing person report from a caller who believes it's 3 years ago. Over the following week, Lisa found herself thinking constantly about Mrs. Donnelly and her missing daughter, Sarah. The authenticity of the woman's distress had been unmistakable, and Lisa had handled enough emergency calls to distinguish between genuine crisis situations and false alarms. She decided to investigate whether Sarah Donnelly had actually gone missing in September 2017. Lisa's research through police databases and missing person records revealed something that sent chills through her understanding of the situation. On September 14, 2017, exactly 3 years before the mysterious call, a 16-year-old girl named Sarah Donnelly had indeed been reported missing in Moreno Valley. The report had been filed by her mother, Margaret Donnelly, who lived at an address on Pine Street that had since been demolished for a housing development. According to the case file, Sarah Donnelly had disappeared while walking home from school and was never found. The investigation continued for several months before being classified as a cold case. Most disturbing of all was the timeline. Margaret Donnelly had first called 911 to report her daughter missing at exactly 7:53 p.m. on September 14, 2017. Her findings to Detective Valdez, who confirmed the case details and added information that made the situation even more unsettling. Margaret Donnelly had died in a car accident in November 2018, more than a year before the mysterious call had been received. Yet the voice on the recording matched perfectly with audio samples from Margaret's original 2017 missing person report. We received a call from a woman who's been dead for almost 2 years, reporting a missing person case that happened 3 years ago, Valdez summarized. And our emergency systems responded as if it was happening in real time. The case attracted the attention of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, which sent Special Agent Dr. Patricia Morrison to investigate the technical and psychological aspects of the incident. Dr. Morrison's initial assessment focused on the possibility of an elaborate hoax using voice synthesis technology and sophisticated hacking of the emergency communication system. However, Dr. Morrison's investigation revealed that the technical complexity required to perpetrate such a hoax would be beyond the capabilities of most criminal organizations, let alone individual perpetrators. The call had been routed through multiple secure systems with timestamp authentication that would be nearly impossible to manipulate externally. Whoever created this effect would need administrative access to multiple emergency communication systems, advanced voice synthesis capabilities, and detailed knowledge of 3-year-old police cases, Dr. Morrison reported. The level of technical sophistication required suggests either a state-level actor or something beyond current technological explanations. Dr. Morrison's investigation expanded to include other emergency communication centers across California, looking for similar incidents involving calls that appeared to originate from past timeframes. What she discovered suggested that the Riverside County incident was part of a larger pattern of temporal communication anomalies affecting emergency services nationwide. Over the past 18 months, 47 emergency centers across 12 states had reported receiving calls that appeared to be from past dates, often involving cases that had occurred years earlier. In each instance, the technical analysis showed impossible routing patterns, authentication from systems that had been offline or demolished, and voice matches for callers who were deceased or otherwise unable to have made the calls. We're seeing a systematic pattern of temporal displacement in emergency communications, Dr. Morrison reported to her supervisors. These aren't isolated technical glitches. They're consistent phenomena that suggest some form of interference with the normal flow of time-based communications. The FBI's investigation revealed that all affected emergency centers had recently upgraded to the same integrated communication system, the Advanced Emergency Response Network, AERN, manufactured by Meridian Communications. The AERN system had been installed in over 300 emergency centers, nationwide as part of a federal modernization initiative. Lisa found herself at the center of the expanding investigation when she reported a second temporal call on October 3, 2020. This time, the caller was a man reporting a house fire that had occurred in 2018, speaking as if the fire was happening in real time. Like Mrs. Donnelly's call, the man's voice matched recordings from the original 2018 emergency response, and the call was routed through systems that had been offline during Lisa's shift. I'm starting to think our communication system is somehow accessing past emergency calls and replaying them as if they're happening now, Lisa explained to Dr. Morrison. But the callers seem to be experiencing their emergencies in real time, not as replayed recordings. Dr. Morrison's technical team, working with Meridian Communications engineers, discovered that the AERN system included experimental quantum communication protocols designed to ensure message delivery even under catastrophic conditions. The quantum elements were intended to create redundant communication pathways that could function regardless of physical infrastructure damage. The quantum communication protocols appear to be creating temporal loops in emergency calls, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, Meridian's lead engineer. Instead of just ensuring message delivery across space, the system seems to be ensuring message delivery across time, connecting emergency calls from past incidents with current dispatch operations. The technical explanation suggested that the AERN system was interpreting past emergency calls as unresolved communications that needed to be delivered to current operators. The quantum protocols were designed to find any available pathway for message delivery, and under certain conditions they were apparently finding pathways through time itself. The system is treating past emergency calls as pending messages that need to be delivered, Dr. Kim explained. When Margaret Donnelly called in 2017 about her missing daughter, her call created a quantum signature in the system. 3 years later, the system found a pathway to deliver that call to a current operator, treating it as a high-priority emergency that had been delayed in transmission. This explanation raised profound questions about the nature of emergency communications and the psychological impact on both callers and operators. If past emergency calls were being delivered to current dispatch centers, it meant that people who had experienced traumatic events years earlier were somehow re-experiencing those traumas in real time, while current operators were being exposed to emergencies they couldn't resolve because they had already concluded years ago. Lisa reported increasing psychological stress from handling temporal calls, describing feelings of helplessness when dealing with emergencies she knew were from the past, but that felt completely immediate and urgent to the callers. When Mrs. Donnelly called about her missing daughter, I wanted to help her find Sarah, Lisa explained to the department psychologist. But I knew that Sarah had never been found, that the case had gone cold, and that Mrs. Donnelly herself was dead. How do you handle a call when you know the ending is tragic and there's nothing you can do to change it? The psychological impact extended to the callers themselves. Follow-up investigations revealed that family members and friends of people who had made emergency calls years earlier were reporting that their deceased or estranged relatives had been experiencing renewed trauma related to their past emergencies. Margaret Donnelly's surviving family members reported that Margaret had appeared to them in dreams, still searching for Sarah and still believing it was September 2017. The temporal calls aren't just affecting current dispatch operations, Dr. Morrison observed. They seem to be creating psychological resonance across time, causing past trauma to manifest in current psychological and social contexts. The FBI ultimately recommended that the ARN system's quantum communication protocols be disabled until their temporal effects could be better understood and controlled. However, this decision was complicated by the fact that the quantum protocols had proven highly effective at ensuring emergency communications during actual disasters, potentially saving hundreds of lives during recent wildfire and earthquake responses. We're faced with a choice between accepting temporal communication anomalies or potentially compromising emergency response capabilities during real disasters, Dr. Morrison reported. The quantum protocols create problems when they deliver past emergency calls, but they also save lives when they ensure current emergency calls reach their destinations under catastrophic conditions. Lisa ultimately requested a transfer to a different position within the emergency communications center, finding that she could no longer handle the uncertainty of not knowing whether incoming calls were from current emergencies or temporal echoes from past traumas. In her final interview, she explained, "Every time my headset activates, I don't know if I'm going to help someone with a current emergency or if I'm going to be connected to someone's past tragedy that I can't do anything to change. That uncertainty makes it impossible to do the job effectively." The Riverside County Emergency Communications Center continues to operate with the AERN system, but with modified protocols for handling suspected temporal calls. Operators are trained to identify the signs of temporal displacement and to provide appropriate psychological support to callers who may be re-experiencing past traumas. The center also maintains a dedicated team of counselors to support operators who handle temporal calls. Dr. Morrison's ongoing research into temporal communication phenomena has contributed to new understanding of how emergency systems interact with human consciousness during traumatic events. Her work suggests that traumatic emergency calls may create what she terms temporal anchors, psychological imprints that can be accessed across time under certain technological conditions. For the families affected by temporal calls, the phenomenon has provided both comfort and additional trauma. Some family members report feeling connected to deceased relatives through the temporal communications, while others find the renewed experience of past emergencies to be psychologically devastating. Margaret Donnelly's surviving son, Thomas, perhaps best captured the complex emotional impact of the temporal calls when he stated, "Hearing that my mother was still looking for Sarah, still trying to bring her home, was both heartbreaking and comforting. It meant that their love for each other was strong enough to cross time itself. But it also meant that they were both still trapped in that terrible night when Sarah disappeared, and nothing we can do will ever bring them peace." The quantum communication protocols continue to operate in emergency centers nationwide, delivering current calls with unprecedented reliability, while occasionally delivering echoes from past traumas that remind operators and callers alike that some emergencies never truly end. They simply wait for the right technological conditions to surface again, carrying their full emotional weight across years and decades, seeking resolution that may never come. Sarah Donnelly remains missing, her case file still open in Moreno Valley Police Department records. And somewhere in the quantum pathways of the emergency communication system, Margaret Donnelly's call continues to seek a dispatcher who can help her bring her daughter home. A cry for help that echoes across time, carrying the full weight of a mother's love and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, somewhen, might still be able to answer. Sergeant Monica Valencia had spent 12 years working gang enforcement in the LAPD's Rampart Division when she was selected to head the department's first social engineering task force in January 2022. The unit was established in response to a troubling trend. Criminals were increasingly using sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques to convince victims to voluntarily surrender money, personal information, and access to secure facilities. Traditional fraud investigation methods proved inadequate for addressing crimes where victims willingly participated in their own victimization, often defending the criminals even after discovering they had been manipulated. Valencia brought extensive experience in understanding criminal psychology and group dynamics from her gang work, but nothing had prepared her for the labyrinthine world of professional social engineering that she would uncover during her first major case. What began as an investigation into a series of seemingly unrelated financial frauds would reveal a criminal enterprise that challenged fundamental assumptions about human behavior, institutional security, and the nature of trust in modern society. The case began with a report from Margaret Chen, a 67-year-old retired teacher from Torrance, who contacted the LAPD to report that she had been convinced to transfer $47,000 from her retirement savings to assist with a federal investigation into money laundering. Chen had received a phone call from someone identifying himself as Special Agent Robert Martinez from the FBI, who explained that her bank account had been compromised by criminals and that she needed to transfer her money to a secure federal account to protect it from theft. "He knew everything about me," Chen explained during her interview with Valencia. "He knew my account numbers, my social security number, the names of my family members, even details about my late husband's military service. When someone knows that much about your life, you assume they must be legitimate." The caller had guided Chen through a complex process involving multiple phone calls, document exchanges, and verification procedures that convinced her that she was participating in a genuine federal investigation. The process took place over 6 days, during which Chen spoke with multiple individuals who claimed to be FBI agents, bank security officers, and federal prosecutors. Each person she spoke with had detailed knowledge about her personal life and financial situation, reinforcing her belief that she was dealing with legitimate authorities. Valencia's initial investigation revealed that Chen had been victimized by what experts call institutional impersonation fraud, a sophisticated form of social engineering where criminals create the illusion of legitimate governmental or corporate authority to manipulate victims into compliance. But as Valencia began investigating similar cases in the LAPD's database, she discovered that Chen's experience was part of a much larger pattern of psychological manipulation that defied conventional understanding of how such frauds operate. Over the past 18 months, the LAPD had received 73 reports of institutional impersonation fraud involving victims who had been convinced to transfer money, provide personal information, or grant access to secure facilities based on contacts from individuals claiming to represent federal agencies, banks, insurance companies, or other trusted institutions. The total financial losses exceeded $2.3 million, but Valencia quickly realized that the financial impact was only part of a much more extensive criminal operation. Detective James Park, Valencia's primary investigator, had been working fraud cases for 8 years and was familiar with traditional confidence schemes and telephone fraud operations. But the cases Valencia assigned him displayed characteristics that distinguished them from typical fraud patterns. "These aren't traditional con games," Park reported after analyzing the first dozen cases. "The perpetrators have access to personal information that should be impossible for criminals to obtain. They're using sophisticated organizational structures that mimic legitimate institutions, and they're targeting victims using psychological profiles that suggest professional-level behavioral analysis." Valencia's team expanded their investigation to include Dr. Sarah Kim, a forensic psychologist who specialized in manipulation and coercion techniques. Dr. Kim's analysis of victim interviews revealed that the social engineering operations were using advanced psychological principles typically employed by intelligence agencies and corporate security firms rather than traditional criminal organizations. These criminals understand cognitive biases, social proof mechanisms, and authority compliance patterns at a level that suggests formal training in psychology or behavioral science, Dr. Kim observed. "They're not just lying to victims, they're creating comprehensive psychological environments that make skepticism and resistance extremely difficult." The psychological techniques included creating artificial urgency through time pressure, establishing credibility through detailed personal knowledge, and reinforcing compliance through multiple verification steps that made victims feel they were being protected rather than victimized. The criminals were also using emotional manipulation, appealing to victims' fears about security, their desire to help with important investigations, and their trust in institutional authority. Valencia decided to investigate how the criminals were obtaining the detailed personal information they used to establish credibility with victims. The level of knowledge displayed in victim interviews suggested access to financial records, government databases, and private information that should have been protected by federal privacy laws and corporate security protocols. Detective Park's investigation into information sources revealed that the social engineering operation was connected to a large-scale data breach network that had been systematically infiltrating legitimate institutions to gather intelligence about potential victims. The criminals weren't just randomly targeting victims, they were selecting individuals based on psychological profiles, financial assets, and personal vulnerabilities that made them ideal candidates for manipulation. "They have access to credit reports, medical records, employment histories, family information, and personal details that they're using to create psychological profiles of potential victims, Park reported. This isn't random fraud. It's targeted psychological warfare based on comprehensive intelligence gathering. The investigation revealed that the criminals had infiltrated customer service departments, technical support operations, and administrative offices at banks, insurance companies, and government agencies. By placing operatives in positions where they had legitimate access to personal information, the criminal organization could gather detailed intelligence about potential victims while maintaining the appearance of conducting legitimate business activities. Valencia's team discovered that at least 12 different legitimate institutions had unknowingly employed individuals who were gathering customer information for the social engineering operation. The criminal operatives worked normal jobs, performed their regular duties competently, and gradually collected personal information about customers that could be used for future manipulation operations. We're dealing with a criminal organization that has conducted a systematic infiltration of legitimate institutions, Valencia concluded. They're not breaking into databases or hacking computer systems. They're getting hired by companies and gathering information through legitimate access that their employment provides. The scope of the infiltration became clear when Valencia's team analyzed employment records at companies where victims had been customers. In each case, the company had employed individuals who had access to the victim's personal information and who had subsequently disappeared or quit their jobs shortly before the social engineering attacks began. Detective Park contacted Maria Santos, a victim who had lost $23,000 in a social engineering attack that convinced her she was helping to investigate corporate fraud at her own bank. Santos's case provided crucial insights into how the criminal organization operated. The person who called me knew everything about my banking history, my mortgage payments, even the specific details of conversations I'd had with customer service representatives, Santos explained. He told me that one of the customer service representatives at my bank was stealing customer information and that I needed to help them gather evidence by conducting test transactions to see if the employee would access my account inappropriately. Santos had been convinced to conduct a series of financial transactions over a 2-week period, believing that she was helping to expose a corrupt bank employee. The criminal who contacted her provided detailed information about internal bank procedures, employee schedules, and security protocols that made his story completely believable. Valencia's investigation revealed that Santos's bank had employed a customer service representative named David Lee, who had access to Santos's account information and who had quit his job 2 days before the social engineering attack began. Lee's employment records showed that he had worked at the bank for only 4 months and had provided false references during the hiring process. David Lee was a criminal operative who got hired specifically to gather information about customers like Maria Santos, Park concluded. He spent 4 months building a profile of potential victims, then quit his job and used that information to conduct social engineering attacks. The investigation expanded to include the FBI's white-collar crime division, when Valencia's team realized that the criminal organization was operating across state lines and targeting victims in multiple jurisdictions. Special Agent Lisa Chen, who specialized in large-scale fraud operations, joined the investigation and brought federal resources to analyze the scope of the criminal enterprise. Agent Chen's investigation revealed that similar social engineering operations were active in 15 cities across 7 states, all using identical psychological manipulation techniques and organizational structures. The criminal organization had infiltrated hundreds of legitimate businesses to gather intelligence about potential victims, and was conducting social engineering attacks with a success rate that far exceeded typical fraud operations. This isn't traditional organized crime, Agent Chen observed. This is a sophisticated intelligence operation that uses criminal methods to infiltrate legitimate institutions and manipulate private citizens. The level of organization and coordination suggests involvement by actors with professional intelligence training. The federal investigation revealed that the social engineering operation was generating over $50 million annually through fraud, but that financial theft was only one component of a larger criminal enterprise. The organization was also using their manipulation capabilities to gather corporate secrets, government information, and personal data that could be sold to other criminal organizations or foreign intelligence services. Valencia's team discovered that some victims had been manipulated into providing access to their workplaces, allowing criminals to infiltrate secure facilities and gather sensitive information. Dr. Robert Torres, a software engineer at a defense contractor, had been convinced that he was helping to investigate a security breach at his company by providing building access codes and computer passwords to individuals claiming to be federal security investigators. They convinced me that there had been a penetration of our computer network by foreign agents, and that I needed to help them verify the security of our systems, Dr. Torres explained. I gave them access codes, computer passwords, and detailed information about our security procedures because I believed I was helping to protect national security. The criminal organization had used Dr. Torres's access to infiltrate his company's computer systems and steal information about classified defense projects. The stolen information was sold to competitors and potentially to foreign intelligence services, generating profits that far exceeded what could be achieved through simple financial fraud. Valencia realized that the social engineering operation represented a new category of criminal enterprise that combined traditional fraud techniques with intelligence gathering capabilities and institutional infiltration. The organization was essentially conducting espionage operations against private citizens and corporate entities using psychological manipulation rather than traditional spying methods. The investigation took a dangerous turn when Valencia discovered that the criminal organization had begun targeting law enforcement officers and their families. 3 LAPD officers had been contacted by individuals claiming to represent internal affairs, federal investigators, or police pension administrators, seeking information about ongoing investigations, department procedures, and personal details about other officers. Officer Janet Rodriguez had been contacted by someone claiming to be investigating corruption within her division and asking for information about her colleagues' financial situations and personal relationships. The caller had detailed knowledge about internal affairs procedures and ongoing investigations that made his story credible. He knew things about internal investigations that only someone with high-level access should know, Rodriguez reported to Valencia. He mentioned specific case numbers, investigator names, and procedural details that aren't available to regular patrol officers. When someone has that level of inside information, you assume they must be legitimate. Valencia's investigation revealed that the criminal organization had successfully infiltrated the LAPD's administrative offices, placing operatives in positions where they had access to internal affairs files, personnel records, and information about ongoing investigations. The infiltration explained how the criminals were able to target law enforcement officers with such detailed and credible social engineering attacks. The discovery of criminal infiltration within the LAPD prompted Valencia to expand her investigation to include a comprehensive security audit of department personnel and procedures. Working with internal affairs and the FBI, she began analyzing employment records, background checks, and access logs to identify potential criminal operatives within the department. The security audit revealed that at least 7 individuals employed by the LAPD in various administrative and support roles had provided false information during the hiring process and had access to sensitive information that could be used for social engineering attacks. These individuals had been systematically gathering information about officers, their families, ongoing investigations, and department procedures for use in criminal operations. We discovered that our own department had been infiltrated by a criminal organization that was using insider access to target our officers and compromise our investigations, Valencia reported to Chief Williams. The level of infiltration suggests that this organization has been planning and executing this operation for several years. The infiltration of law enforcement agencies added a new dimension to the social engineering investigation. The criminal organization wasn't just targeting private citizens and corporations. They were systematically compromising law enforcement capabilities by manipulating officers and gathering intelligence about police operations. Valencia's team discovered that the criminal operatives within the LAPD had been providing advance warning to the social engineering operation about fraud investigations, allowing the criminals to modify their operations to avoid detection. They had also been gathering personal information about officers that was used to target law enforcement families with manipulation attacks designed to compromise officer loyalty and effectiveness. Detective Park's investigation revealed that the social engineering operation had successfully manipulated the families of 12 different LAPD officers, convincing spouses and children to provide information about officer schedules, financial situations, and personal relationships. The manipulation of officer families created psychological pressure and security vulnerabilities that could be exploited to influence police behavior. They weren't just gathering information from our officers, Park observed. They were manipulating our officers' families to create emotional and financial pressure that could be used to influence how officers conducted their duties. They were essentially conducting psychological operations against law enforcement personnel. The psychological impact on targeted officers was severe. Many reported feeling paranoid about communications from legitimate authorities, uncertain about the trustworthiness of colleagues, and concerned about the safety of their families. The social engineering attacks had created an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust within the department that affected operational effectiveness. Dr. Kim's psychological evaluation of targeted officers revealed symptoms consistent with prolonged psychological harassment and manipulation. Officers reported difficulty distinguishing between legitimate communications and potential social engineering attacks, leading to delays in responding to legitimate administrative requests and reluctance to share information with colleagues. The social engineering attacks have created a psychological environment where officers can't trust normal communications or standard procedures, Dr. Kim reported. This has fundamentally undermined the trust and cooperation that effective policing requires. Valencia realized that the criminal organization had achieved something that traditional criminal enterprises rarely accomplish. They had successfully infiltrated and disrupted law enforcement operations through psychological manipulation rather than corruption or violence. The social engineering attacks were more effective than traditional criminal methods at compromising police effectiveness. The investigation reached a critical phase when Valencia's team identified a pattern in the social engineering attacks that suggested the criminal organization was planning a major operation that would use their accumulated intelligence to conduct a large-scale criminal enterprise. Analysis of victim profiles and information-gathering patterns suggested that the criminals were preparing to use their psychological manipulation capabilities for something beyond traditional fraud. Agent Chen's federal investigation revealed that similar social engineering operations in other cities had been used to facilitate bank robberies, corporate espionage, and even terrorist activities. The criminal organization was essentially providing psychological manipulation services to other criminal enterprises, using their infiltration capabilities and victim intelligence to enable more serious crimes. "We're not just dealing with fraud," Agent Chen concluded. We're dealing with a criminal organization that provides psychological warfare capabilities to other criminal enterprises. They're essentially mercenaries who specialize in manipulating people and institutions to facilitate criminal activities. Valencia's team discovered evidence that the social engineering operation was planning to use their accumulated intelligence about law enforcement procedures and personnel to facilitate a major criminal operation in Los Angeles. Intercepted communications suggested that the criminals were planning to use their knowledge of police response patterns and officer assignments to conduct a sophisticated heist operation. The planned operation involved using social engineering techniques to manipulate bank employees, security personnel, and law enforcement officers to create conditions that would allow criminals to access a Federal Reserve facility in downtown Los Angeles. The operation would require precise coordination and detailed knowledge of security procedures that the social engineering organization had been gathering for over 2 years. Valencia's team worked with federal authorities to develop a counter-operation designed to identify and arrest the criminal organization before they could execute their planned heist. The operation required careful coordination to avoid alerting the criminals while simultaneously protecting the targeted Federal Reserve facility. The counter-operation faced significant challenges because the criminal organization had demonstrated sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities. They had successfully avoided detection for over 2 years while conducting hundreds of social engineering attacks, suggesting that they had methods for identifying and avoiding law enforcement surveillance. Valencia decided to use the criminals' own social engineering techniques against them, creating a false investigation scenario designed to draw the criminal operatives into revealing themselves. Working with Agent Chen, she developed a complex deception operation that mimicked the psychological manipulation techniques used by the criminals. The deception operation involved creating false intelligence about a supposed security vulnerability at a different financial institution, designed to redirect the criminals' attention away from the Federal Reserve facility, while drawing them into a controlled environment where they could be identified and arrested. The operation required Valencia's team to conduct their own social engineering attacks against suspected criminal operatives, using psychological manipulation techniques to convince the criminals that they had discovered a more attractive target for their planned heist. The ethical implications of using criminal methods for law enforcement purposes created significant concerns within the department. We found ourselves using the same psychological manipulation techniques against the criminals that they had been using against innocent victims, Valencia reflected. It was effective, but it raised serious questions about the methods we're willing to employ to stop criminal activities. The deception operation succeeded in identifying the location of the criminal organization's operational headquarters and the identities of key operatives. On March 23, 2023, coordinated raids were conducted at 17 locations across Los Angeles, resulting in 34 arrests and the seizure of extensive records documenting the social engineering operation. The arrested individuals included the criminal operatives who had infiltrated the LAPD, bank employees who had been gathering customer information, and the core leadership of the social engineering organization. Seized evidence revealed the full scope of the criminal enterprise and its connections to other criminal organizations nationwide. The investigation revealed that the social engineering operation had successfully manipulated over 1,200 victims across 7 states, generating more than $50 million in direct financial losses and facilitating additional criminal activities worth over $200 million. The organization had infiltrated 47 different legitimate institutions and had gathered detailed psychological profiles on thousands of potential victims. Most disturbing was the discovery that the criminal organization had been selling their psychological manipulation services to foreign intelligence agencies, using their infiltration capabilities to gather information about government employees, defense contractors, and other individuals with access to sensitive national security information. This wasn't just criminal fraud, Agent Chen concluded. This was a systematic intelligence operation that used criminal methods to penetrate American institutions and gather information for foreign adversaries. The social engineering attacks were essentially espionage operations conducted against private citizens. The trials of the arrested individuals revealed the sophisticated training and organization that had made the social engineering operation so effective. Many of the criminal operatives had backgrounds in psychology, military intelligence, or corporate security, and had received formal training in psychological manipulation techniques. The criminal organization's training materials, seized during the raids, included detailed manuals on cognitive biases, social proof mechanisms, authority compliance, and other psychological principles used to manipulate victims. The materials were sophisticated enough to be used in legitimate psychology or security training programs. Valencia's testimony during the trials provided crucial evidence about the systematic nature of the criminal enterprise and its impact on law enforcement operations. Her investigation had documented how the social engineering attacks had compromised police effectiveness and created lasting psychological trauma for both officers and victims. The sentences imposed on the convicted criminals ranged from 5 to 25 years in federal prison, with enhanced penalties for those who had targeted law enforcement officers or facilitated national security breaches. The criminal organization's leadership received the longest sentences, reflecting the scope and sophistication of their criminal enterprise. For the victims of the social engineering attacks, recovery has been a complex process involving financial restitution, psychological counseling, and ongoing security measures to prevent further victimization. Many victims reported lasting effects from the psychological manipulation, including difficulty trusting legitimate authorities and institutions. Margaret Chen, whose case had initiated Valencia's investigation, eventually recovered most of her stolen money through federal restitution programs, but continued to struggle with the psychological impact of being manipulated so thoroughly by criminals who seemed to know everything about her life. The money was important, but what really hurt was realizing how completely I had been fooled, Chen reflected. These people understood my psychology better than I understood it myself. They knew exactly what to say and how to say it to make me believe things that I should have known were impossible. Valencia was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to lead a new unit focused on preventing and investigating sophisticated fraud operations that target institutional security and public trust. Her work on the social engineering case has influenced law enforcement training programs nationwide and has contributed to new protocols for identifying and preventing psychological manipulation attacks. The Social Engineering Task Force was expanded and given additional resources to address the growing threat of psychological manipulation in criminal activities. The unit now works closely with federal agencies to identify and prevent criminal organizations that use sophisticated manipulation techniques to target both private citizens and government institutions. The social engineering case taught us that modern criminals understand psychology and human behavior in ways that traditional law enforcement training doesn't adequately address, Valencia explained in her final report. We need to understand how criminals use psychological manipulation, not just to steal money, but to infiltrate institutions, compromise security, and undermine public trust in legitimate authorities. The case has become a standard example in law enforcement training programs of how criminal organizations can use psychological manipulation to achieve objectives that traditional criminal methods cannot accomplish. It demonstrates the importance of understanding human psychology in modern policing and the need for specialized training to identify and counter sophisticated manipulation techniques. For the LAPD, the case resulted in significant improvements to personnel security procedures, communication protocols, and training programs designed to help officers identify and resist social engineering attacks. The department implemented new verification procedures for internal communications and established protocols for confirming the legitimacy of investigative requests. Dr. Kim's ongoing research into the psychological techniques used by the criminal organization has contributed to new understanding of how institutional authority can be manipulated and exploited by individuals with sophisticated knowledge of human behavior. Her work has influenced security protocols at government agencies and corporations nationwide. The most important lesson from this case, Dr. Kim concluded, is that trust in institutional authority, which is essential for society to function, can be weaponized by criminals who understand how to exploit that trust. We need to develop better methods for verifying legitimate authority while maintaining the trust relationships that legitimate institutions require. The social engineering operation that Valencia investigated has been linked to similar criminal enterprises in other countries, suggesting that psychological manipulation techniques are being developed and shared by international criminal organizations. The global nature of these operations has led to increased cooperation between law enforcement agencies worldwide. Agent Chen continues to investigate international connections to the social engineering operation, working with law enforcement agencies in multiple countries to identify and disrupt similar criminal enterprises. Her work has contributed to new international protocols for sharing information about psychological manipulation techniques used by criminal organizations. Social engineering represents a new category of criminal activity that transcends traditional boundaries between fraud, espionage, and terrorism, Agent Chen observed. These criminal organizations use psychological manipulation to achieve objectives that range from financial theft to national security breaches, and they operate across international boundaries in ways that challenge traditional law enforcement approaches. For Valencia, the social engineering case fundamentally changed her understanding of modern criminal enterprises and the challenges facing contemporary law enforcement. The case demonstrated that criminals can be more sophisticated, more organized, and more psychologically astute than traditional policing methods assume. We've always focused on preventing and investigating crimes after they occur, Valencia reflected. But social engineering attacks prevent us from recognizing that crimes are occurring while they're happening. The victims willingly participate in their own victimization, and the criminals use our own institutional procedures and psychological biases against us. It's a type of criminal activity that challenges everything we thought we knew about how to protect people from criminal exploitation. The Social Engineering Task Force continues to investigate similar criminal enterprises and to develop new methods for identifying and preventing psychological manipulation attacks. Valencia's work has established Los Angeles as a national center for expertise in counter-social engineering techniques and has influenced law enforcement approaches to sophisticated fraud operations nationwide. The case serves as a reminder that in an age of increasing technological sophistication and psychological understanding, criminal organizations can develop capabilities that rival those of legitimate institutions. The challenge for law enforcement is to develop comparable sophistication in understanding and countering criminal psychology while maintaining the ethical standards and public trust that distinguish legitimate law enforcement from criminal enterprises. As Valencia noted in her final interview, the social engineering case taught me that the most dangerous criminals aren't necessarily those with guns or explosives. They're those who understand human psychology well enough to make people want to help them commit crimes. When criminals can turn our own trust and cooperation into weapons against us, we need to completely rethink how we approach crime prevention and investigation. Captain Frank Morrison had been running the night shift at the Suffolk County Police Department's 3rd Precinct on Long Island for 8 years when the sleep problems began. It started innocuously enough. A few officers reporting unusual dreams after particularly challenging shifts, complaints about fatigue that seemed disproportionate to their actual workload, and a general sense among the night crew that something felt off about working in the precinct after midnight. Morrison initially attributed these concerns to the natural psychological strain of police work, particularly the disruption to circadian rhythms that came with permanent night duty. But by October 2017, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. 12 officers assigned to the night shift were reporting nearly identical sleep disturbances. Vivid, disturbing dreams that seemed to continue even after they woke up, episodes of sleep paralysis while on duty, and, most troubling, shared dream content that multiple officers described independently with remarkable consistency. The dreams always involved the precinct building itself. Officers reported walking through familiar corridors that somehow led to rooms that didn't exist in the actual building, basement levels below the known basement, additional floors above the 2nd story, and office spaces that stretched beyond the building's physical dimensions. In these dream environments, officers encountered other police personnel who didn't match anyone currently or previously employed by the department, responding to calls that seemed urgent but made no logical sense, and handling cases that blended familiar police procedures with increasingly surreal circumstances. What made these reports particularly disturbing was their consistency. Officer Janet Reeves, a 7-year veteran, described encountering a detective in a basement interrogation room that she knew didn't exist, questioning a suspect about crimes that had happened next Tuesday. Officer Miguel Santos reported walking through what appeared to be an endless evidence storage room, where every box was labeled with his own name, but contained personal belongings he'd never owned. Most troubling was Officer David Kim's recurring dream of responding to radio calls from dispatch, only to realize that the voice giving him instructions was his own, speaking from some future version of himself that knew about incidents that hadn't yet occurred. Captain Morrison initially referred the affected officers to the department's Employee Assistance Program, assuming they were dealing with stress-related sleep disorders that would resolve with proper counseling and possibly sleep medication. But the psychological evaluations conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the department's consulting psychologist, revealed something far more complex than simple work-related stress. These officers aren't just having unusual dreams, Dr. Harper reported to Morrison after conducting extensive interviews. They're experiencing what appears to be shared lucid dreaming, with a consistency that defies conventional understanding of dream psychology. They're not just describing similar themes, they're describing identical environments, identical encounters, and in some cases, identical conversations with the same non-existent personnel. Dr. Harper's most unsettling finding was that the officers were experiencing these dreams while on duty. Several reported falling asleep at their desks or in their patrol cars for what felt like hours, only to discover that no time had passed according to their colleagues or the station clocks. Security footage confirmed this phenomenon. Cameras showed officers sitting motionless at their workstations or in their vehicles for extended periods. But the timestamps indicated these episodes lasted only seconds in real time. They're entering deep sleep states instantaneously and experiencing hours of dream time and moments of real time, Dr. Harper explained. This isn't medically possible under normal circumstances. Deep sleep cycles require sustained periods of unconsciousness, but these officers are dropping into REM sleep and back out in time frames that should only allow for microsleep episodes. The situation escalated when Officer Reeves reported that her dreams had begun to include specific information about actual ongoing investigations. In her dreams, she encountered the non-existent detective who provided detailed briefings about cases she was working on during her waking hours, including information that hadn't been available to her through normal investigative channels. When she followed up on these dream-provided leads, she found them to be accurate and helpful in resolving actual cases. The detective in my dreams knows things about these cases that I haven't learned yet. Reeves reported to Dr. Harper. He tells me where to find evidence, who to interview, what questions to ask. When I wake up and follow his suggestions, they work. I'm solving cases with information I'm getting from dreams about a person who doesn't exist. Morrison ordered an investigation into whether Reeves was receiving information through unofficial channels. Perhaps another detective was providing case details that she was incorporating into her dreams. But the information she was receiving went beyond what any single person in the department could have known. The dream detective was providing insights that required access to multiple ongoing investigations, forensic lab results that hadn't been completed, and witness statements that hadn't yet been taken. Other officers began reporting similar experiences. Officer Santos found that his dreams about the endless evidence room helped him locate misfiled physical evidence in the real precinct building. Officer Kim's dreams about receiving radio calls from his future self provided advance warning about emergency situations that would develop during his shifts. In each case, the dream content was proving useful in their actual police work, but in ways that defied rational explanation. Dr. Harper expanded her study to include sleep monitoring equipment, setting up a temporary sleep lab in an unused office within the precinct. Officers volunteered to be monitored during their shifts, allowing Dr. Harper to record their brain activity during the instantaneous sleep episodes. The results challenged her understanding of human neurology. These officers are achieving REM sleep faster than should be physiologically possible, Dr. Harper documented. Normal sleep cycles require 60 to 90 minutes to reach REM stages, but these subjects are entering REM sleep within 30 seconds of losing consciousness. More significantly, their REM activity shows patterns consistent with shared experiences. Multiple subjects monitored simultaneously show synchronized brainwave patterns during their sleep episodes. The synchronized brainwaves suggested that the officers weren't just having similar dreams. They were somehow sharing the same dream space. When Officer Reeves and Officer Santos were monitored simultaneously during sleep episodes that occurred at the same time, their brain activity showed remarkable synchronization, particularly in areas associated with spatial navigation and social interaction. It's as if they're actually meeting in these dream environments, Dr. Harper reported. Their brains are processing shared spatial and social experiences despite being asleep in separate locations. This level of synchronized dreaming has no precedent in sleep research literature. The shared dreaming phenomenon reached a new level of complexity when officers began reporting encounters with personnel who seemed to be from different time periods. Officer Kim described meeting what appeared to be 1980s-era detectives using outdated equipment and procedures, while Officer Santos encountered modern officers using technology that didn't yet exist. Most disturbing were reports of encountering officers who appeared to be from their own time period, but knew about events that hadn't happened yet. I met Officer Martinez in the Dream Precinct last night, Officer Reeves reported during one of her sessions with Dr. Harper. She was working on a homicide case that happened next month. She showed me crime scene photos and gave me details about the investigation. When I woke up, I checked. There is no Officer Martinez currently employed by this department, and no homicide matching her description has occurred. Dr. Harper's investigation into these temporal anomalies led her to research the history of the precinct building itself. The third precinct had been constructed in 1962 on the site of a former medical facility that had operated from 1923 to 1959. The medical facility had included an experimental sleep research wing that conducted pioneering studies on dream states and sleep disorders during the 1940s and 1950s. The original sleep research conducted in this building was cutting edge for its time, Dr. Harper discovered in archived medical journals. Dr. Richard Kellner's team was investigating the possibility of shared consciousness during sleep states, attempting to establish communication between subjects while they dreamed. The research was discontinued in 1958, following several incidents where subjects experienced psychological trauma related to their participation in the studies. Dr. Harper found records indicating that Dr. Kellner's research had achieved some success in creating shared dream experiences among volunteer subjects, but the studies were terminated when participants began reporting encounters with individuals who weren't part of the research program. Unknown people who seemed to be accessing the shared dream space from outside the controlled experimental environment. Dr. Kellner's final reports describe what he termed temporal intrusions in the shared dream space, Dr. Harper noted. Subjects reported encountering people from different time periods, receiving information about events that hadn't yet occurred, and experiencing what appeared to be memories from past or future versions of themselves. The parallels between Dr. Kellner's 1950s research and the current experiences of the night shift officers were undeniable. Both involved rapid onset of shared REM sleep, encounters with unknown individuals in familiar environments, and the transmission of information that shouldn't have been accessible to the subjects. Dr. Harper's investigation revealed that the basement level of the current precinct building included sections of the original medical facility's sleep research wing. Architectural plans showed that several rooms in the precinct's basement were built directly on top of Dr. Kellner's original sleep laboratories, and some of the original electrical and ventilation systems were still integrated into the building's infrastructure. It's possible that some aspect of Dr. Kellner's experimental apparatus is still influencing the electromagnetic environment of this building, Dr. Harper theorized. The officers working night shifts may be particularly susceptible to whatever conditions Dr. Kellner created to facilitate shared dreaming, especially given that they're working in a high-stress environment that might make them more psychologically receptive to unusual experiences. Captain Morrison authorized a comprehensive environmental study of the precinct building, looking for any unusual electromagnetic fields, subsonic frequencies, or other environmental factors that might explain the shared dreaming phenomenon. The study, conducted by Dr. Patricia Vance from the State University's Physics Department, found several anomalous readings in areas of the building that corresponded to the original sleep research facilities. The basement areas show electromagnetic field patterns that don't match any standard building systems, Dr. Vance reported. There appear to be low-frequency emissions that could potentially influence brainwave patterns, particularly in individuals who are already predisposed to altered states of consciousness through fatigue or stress. More significantly, Dr. Vance's team discovered physical evidence of Dr. Kellner's original research equipment still embedded in the building's structure. Behind a wall in the basement, they found a room that had been sealed during the 1962 construction, but still contained what appeared to be 1950s-era electronic equipment designed to monitor and potentially influence brain activity. The equipment is obsolete, but still functional, Dr. Vance observed. It appears to be designed to emit specific electromagnetic frequencies that match those associated with REM sleep patterns. If this equipment has been operating continuously since the 1950s, it could explain the unusual sleep phenomena experienced by personnel working in this building. The discovery of Dr. Kellner's equipment led Morrison to make a difficult decision. Rather than attempt to disable equipment that might be affecting his officers' psychological well-being, he chose to take advantage of the unique situation they had discovered. If the night shift officers were accessing some form of enhanced investigative capability through their shared dreams, Morrison wanted to understand how this phenomenon could be used effectively while minimizing psychological risks. We have 12 officers who are essentially conducting investigations while they sleep, Morrison explained to his supervisors. They're solving cases faster, finding evidence more efficiently, and preventing crimes before they happen. I want to understand how we can harness this capability responsibly. Morrison established what he informally called the Night Watch Protocol, a system where the affected officers would document their dream experiences immediately upon waking and coordinate their findings with ongoing investigations. Dr. Harper continued her monitoring to ensure the officers' psychological well-being, while Dr. Vance studied the technical aspects of how Dr. Kellner's equipment might be facilitating the shared dreaming. The Night Watch protocol proved remarkably effective. Over the following 6 months, the night shift solved 23% more cases than any comparable unit in the county, prevented 4 major crimes through advance information obtained in dreams, and located evidence in 7 cold cases that had been unsolved for years. The success rate was so significant that other precincts began requesting information about 3rd Precinct's investigative methods. However, the psychological toll on the officers remained concerning. Dr. Harper documented increasing difficulty among the participants in distinguishing between information obtained through normal investigative work and insights gained through dream experiences. Officers reported feeling uncertain about the source of their knowledge and concerned about the reliability of information that came from non-rational sources. These officers are becoming extraordinarily effective investigators, Dr. Harper reported. But they're losing confidence in their traditional policing skills. They're beginning to rely on dream information instead of conventional investigative techniques, and they're questioning the validity of evidence they've obtained through normal means. The most troubling development came when Officer Kim reported a dream encounter that provided advance warning about a serious officer safety issue. In his dream, he met a future version of himself who warned him about a domestic violence call that would result in an officer-involved shooting. The future Kim provided specific details about the address, the suspect's behavior, and the tactical approach that would prevent the shooting from occurring. When the actual call came and 3 days later, Kim recognized the address and circumstances from his dream. He modified the department's response based on the warning he'd received, taking additional backup and approaching the situation with enhanced caution. The result was a peaceful resolution to a situation that, according to Kim's dream, would have resulted in tragedy. Officer Kim prevented what could have been a fatal shooting based entirely on information he received in a dream, Morrison documented. This raises serious questions about the operational and ethical implications of using paranormal investigative methods, regardless of their effectiveness. The ethical considerations became more complex when the officers began reporting dream encounters with suspects and victims from their cases. Officer Santos described interviewing murder victims in the dream precinct, receiving detailed accounts of their final moments, and identifying information about their killers. Officer Reeves reported conducting interrogations with suspects who confessed to crimes in the dream environment, providing details that later proved accurate when she applied the information to real investigations. We're essentially conducting police interviews with people who are either dead or unaware that they're providing information, Dr. Harper noted. The ethical implications of using information obtained through these means are unprecedented in law enforcement. The situation reached a crisis point when Officer Martinez, the same Martinez whom Officer Reeves had encountered in dreams, despite no such person being employed by the department, appeared for her first day of work at the 3rd Precinct. Martinez had been transferred from another precinct and assigned to the day shift. but her appearance exactly matched the descriptions provided by officers who had encountered her in their shared dreams. More disturbing, Martinez possessed detailed knowledge about the homicide case that Officer Reeves had discussed with her dream counterpart weeks earlier. The case had indeed occurred, exactly as described in the dream encounters, and Martinez had been the lead investigator before her transfer. Officer Martinez knew details about interactions she'd had with our night shift officers, despite never having met them before, Morrison documented. She described conversations that our officers remembered from their dreams, conversations that apparently occurred from Martinez's perspective while she was awake and working her regular duties at her previous assignment. Dr. Harper's interview with Martinez revealed that she had been experiencing her own unusual sleep phenomena at her previous precinct. Dreams about working with unfamiliar officers at a different station, handling cases that weren't part of her regular assignment, and providing guidance to personnel she didn't recognize. The temporal sequence suggested that Martinez had been experiencing the shared dream space from her location at a different precinct, weeks before her transfer to the 3rd Precinct. Officer Martinez has been participating in the shared dream environment from a remote location, Dr. Harper concluded. This suggests that Dr. Kellner's equipment is creating a field effect that extends beyond this building, potentially connecting law enforcement personnel across multiple locations who are working under similar psychological and environmental conditions. The implications were staggering. If the shared dreaming phenomenon could connect officers across different precincts, it suggested a network of unconscious police work that spanned geographical boundaries. Officers might be collaborating on cases, sharing information, and coordinating investigations while asleep, creating an unofficial but highly effective parallel investigation system. Morrison's final report on the Night Watch protocol recommended continued monitoring and research, but also expressed serious concerns about the long-term implications of officers whose investigative capabilities depended on phenomena they couldn't consciously control or fully understand. The effectiveness of these methods is undeniable, Morrison wrote, but we're asking officers to base life and death decisions on information obtained through dreams. We're creating a generation of police who may lose confidence in traditional investigative methods and become dependent on paranormal sources of information. Dr. Harper's ongoing research into the 3rd Precinct phenomenon has contributed to new understanding of how environmental factors can influence collective human consciousness in high-stress professions. Her work has influenced protocols at other police departments for monitoring officer psychological well-being and investigating unusual workplace phenomena. The basement room containing Dr. Kellner's equipment remains sealed, but continues to operate. Dr. Vance's attempts to disable the equipment resulted in immediate cessation of the shared dreaming phenomenon, but also led to a dramatic decrease in the night shift's investigative effectiveness and an increase in officer safety incidents. Morrison made the decision to leave the equipment operational while continuing to monitor its effects. For the officers of the 3rd Precinct night shift, the shared dreaming has become an accepted part of their professional routine. They continue to solve cases through dream encounters, prevent crimes through advance information, and coordinate investigations with personnel they meet only in sleep. But they also struggle with fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, the reliability of paranormal information, and the ethical implications of their enhanced capabilities. Officer Reeves, in her final interview with Dr. Harper, perhaps best captured the complex reality of their situation. I'm a better cop because of these dreams. I solve more cases, I help more people, I prevent more crimes. But I don't understand how any of it works, and I'm never sure if the information I'm acting on is real or just something my brain is creating. How do you do police work when your best source of information is something that shouldn't exist? The 3rd Precinct continues to operate with its enhanced investigative capabilities, its officers walking the line between rational police work and something that defies conventional understanding. And in the basement, Dr. Kellner's equipment continues its unknown function, connecting minds across time and space, facilitating a form of law enforcement that exists somewhere between consciousness and dream, between the possible and the impossible. Detective Amanda Foster had always been good with numbers. It's what made her perfect for the NYPD's newly formed Pattern Recognition Unit, a specialized division established in early 2021 to analyze crime data using advanced algorithmic modeling. The unit occupied a converted conference room on the 4th floor of One Police Plaza, equipped with state-of-the-art computers and direct access to every crime database in the 5 boroughs. Foster's job was to feed crime statistics into sophisticated software programs that would identify patterns, predict hotspots, and theoretically prevent crimes before they occurred. What Foster discovered in the data during her first month on the job would expose a conspiracy so vast and methodical that it challenged everything she thought she knew about crime, policing, and the nature of human behavior in New York City. The Pattern Recognition Unit had been the brainchild of Deputy Commissioner Robert Chen, who had convinced the mayor's office that predictive policing represented the future of law enforcement. Using algorithms developed by MIT researchers, the unit was tasked with analyzing crime patterns across temporal, geographical, and demographic variables to identify emerging trends before they became visible to traditional investigative methods. Foster, with her background in statistical analysis and 8 years of experience as a detective in Brooklyn's 78th Precinct, had been hand-selected for the unit. Her colleagues, Detective Marcus Williams from Queens and Detective Janet Rodriguez from the Bronx, brought similar analytical backgrounds and reputations for thoroughness that made them ideal candidates for the experimental program. The unit's first assignment was to analyze robbery patterns in Manhattan's Upper East Side, where there had been a 23% increase in street robberies over the past 6 months. Traditional investigation had yielded few leads, with the crimes appearing random and unconnected. Foster's job was to find the hidden patterns that human analysis had missed. Foster began by inputting every robbery report from the past year into the analysis software, along with weather data, economic indicators, demographic information, and even social media activity levels for the targeted areas. The algorithm was designed to process thousands of variables simultaneously, identifying correlations that would be impossible for human investigators to detect. The initial results were promising but unremarkable. The software identified optimal patrol times, geographic clustering patterns, and demographic profiles that aligned with existing police knowledge about robbery trends. But as Foster refined her parameters and extended the analysis period, she began to notice something that made her deeply uncomfortable. The robberies weren't random. They were following a pattern so precise and deliberate that it suggested coordination on a massive scale. Every robbery in the Upper East Side during the past 18 months had occurred within a specific geographic grid, with timing that corresponded to predetermined intervals, and with victim selection that followed demographic criteria so specific that it couldn't possibly be coincidental. "Marcus, look at this," Foster called to Detective Williams, pulling up a geographic display on her monitor. "I've plotted every robbery in the past year, and they're forming a perfect grid pattern. Look. Every incident is exactly 0.3 miles from the next, following north-south and east-west lines that divide the Upper East Side into precise rectangular zones." Williams studied the display, his expression shifting from mild interest to genuine concern. "That's not possible. Random street crime doesn't follow geometric patterns. Are you sure the data is correct?" Foster had already verified the data multiple times, cross-referencing police reports with victim statements, hospital records, and insurance claims. The pattern was undeniable. Every robbery had occurred at the intersection of invisible grid lines that divided the Upper East Side into 247 identical rectangular zones, each measuring approximately 0.3 miles by 0.2 miles. More disturbing was the temporal pattern. The robberies weren't just geographically coordinated. They were occurring in a specific sequence that moved systematically through the grid zones. Starting from the northeast corner of the area, the robberies progressed in a serpentine pattern, moving south through each column before advancing to the next column to the west. "It's like someone is working their way through a checklist," Foster observed, tracing the progression pattern on her screen. "They're systematically hitting every zone in order, and they're about 73% complete with the grid." Detective Rodriguez joined the analysis, bringing up victim profiles on her computer. What she found added another layer of disturbing precision to the pattern. "The victims aren't random either," she reported. "In each grid zone, the robbery victim matches specific demographic criteria. Age, income level, profession, even physical characteristics follow consistent patterns. The victim selection criteria were so specific that they suggested the perpetrators had conducted extensive reconnaissance before each robbery. In grid zone A1, the victim was always a white male, aged 35 to 45, working in finance, carrying designer accessories. In zone A2, the victim was consistently a white female, aged 28 to 38, working in fashion or media, carrying luxury handbags. The pattern continued across all completed zones with mathematical precision. "This isn't traditional crime," Foster concluded after analyzing the data for 3 weeks. "This is some kind of systematic operation with specific objectives that go beyond simple theft." Foster's team expanded their analysis to include the stolen items, discovering that the robbery targets weren't selecting valuable items randomly. Each robbery resulted in the theft of specific categories of objects: certain types of watches, particular brands of phones, specific models of wallets and purses. The stolen items appeared to be chosen based on criteria that had nothing to do with their monetary value. "They're not stealing the most valuable items," Williams observed, reviewing the theft inventory data. "They're stealing specific items that meet predetermined criteria. Some victims had much more valuable jewelry or electronics that were ignored in favor of less valuable items that matched the selection pattern." The investigation took an ominous turn when Foster realized that the grid pattern wasn't limited to the Upper East Side. Using the pattern recognition software to analyze robbery data from other Manhattan neighborhoods, she discovered that similar geometric patterns existed in Midtown, the financial district, and the Village. Each area was being systematically worked through using identical grid methodologies, but with different victim demographics and theft criteria. "We're looking at a coordinated operation that spans the entire borough," Foster reported to Deputy Commissioner Chen. "Multiple crews are working simultaneously in different neighborhoods, following identical organizational methods, but targeting different demographic groups and stealing different categories of items." Chen's reaction to Foster's findings was immediate and concerning. Instead of authorizing expanded investigation or coordination with other units, he instructed the Pattern Recognition Unit to limit their analysis to the original Upper East Side assignment and to avoid speculative expansion beyond their designated parameters. "Detective Foster, I appreciate your thoroughness, but the unit's mandate is specific," Chen explained during a private meeting. "We're tasked with analyzing the Upper East Side robberies, not with developing conspiracy theories about citywide crime coordination. Please focus your analysis on the assigned geographic area." Foster found Chen's response troubling, particularly given the clear evidence of a systematic operation that extended far beyond any single neighborhood. She decided to continue her expanded analysis during off hours, using her legitimate access to the crime databases to investigate the full scope of the pattern she had discovered. Working late nights and weekends, Foster mapped robbery patterns across all 5 boroughs, discovering that the systematic grid operations were active in 23 different neighborhoods. Each area was being worked through methodically, with different crews following identical organizational principles but targeting different demographic groups and stealing different categories of items. The scope of the operation was staggering. Foster estimated that over 1,200 robberies during the past 18 months were part of the coordinated grid system, involving dozens of different crews working in precise coordination across the city. The level of organization required suggested involvement by a large criminal organization with sophisticated planning capabilities and extensive intelligence-gathering resources. More troubling was Foster's discovery that the robbery crews seemed to have detailed advance information about their targets. Analysis of victim schedules showed that robberies consistently occurred when targets were carrying the specific items the crews were seeking, suggesting surveillance capabilities that went far beyond simple street-level observation. They know exactly when each target will be carrying the items they want, Foster documented in her private notes. This requires advanced intelligence about victim behavior, work schedules, shopping patterns, and social activities. They're not opportunistic street criminals. They're conducting targeted operations based on comprehensive surveillance. Foster's investigation revealed that the stolen items were being selected based on criteria that suggested they weren't destined for traditional fencing operations. Many of the targeted items had little resale value, but possessed characteristics that made them useful for identity theft, corporate espionage, or other sophisticated criminal activities. Stolen phones were consistently newer models with specific security features. Stolen wallets always contained particular types of credit cards and identification documents. Stolen watches and jewelry were always items that could be used to establish credible false identities for individuals matching the demographic profiles of the robbery victims. This isn't about money, Foster realized. They're stealing identity components, items that allow them to impersonate specific demographic groups for purposes we haven't identified yet. Foster decided to test her theory by conducting unofficial surveillance of areas where the grid pattern predicted future robberies would occur. Using the mathematical progression she had identified, she could predict with high accuracy when and where the next robberies would take place. On a Tuesday evening in March 2021, Foster positioned herself near the intersection of 84th Street and Lexington Avenue, where her analysis predicted the next grid zone robbery would occur between 7:30 and 8:15 p.m. The target profile suggested a white male, aged 38 to 47, working in finance, carrying a specific type of briefcase and wearing a particular style of watch. At 7:52 p.m., Foster observed a man matching the exact demographic profile walking east on 84th Street. She watched as 3 individuals, 2 men and 1 woman, all appearing to be in their 20s, approached the target from different directions. The robbery was conducted with professional efficiency, lasting less than 90 seconds. The perpetrators took only the target's briefcase, watch, and phone, ignoring his wallet, which contained over $400 in cash. Foster attempted to follow the perpetrators but lost them in the subway system. However, she had observed enough to confirm that the robberies were being conducted by trained teams following specific protocols. The perpetrators communicated through hand signals, positioned themselves to control sight lines and escape routes, and executed the robbery with a level of coordination that suggested military or law enforcement training. Foster's unofficial surveillance of 3 additional predicted robbery locations yielded similar observations. Each robbery was conducted by a different team. but all teams followed identical tactical procedures and victim selection criteria. The operations were clearly part of a larger coordinated effort involving multiple trained crews working under unified command. Armed with this evidence, Foster decided to approach her colleagues in other units who might be investigating similar patterns. She contacted Detective Sarah Kim in the Major Case Squad, explaining her findings and requesting information about any ongoing investigations into coordinated robbery operations. Kim's response was both validating and terrifying. "Amanda, we've been tracking something similar for the past 8 months, but from a different angle. We've been investigating identity theft rings that seem to have access to personal information and physical identity components that should be impossible to obtain through normal criminal channels." Kim's investigation had identified at least 12 different identity theft operations that were using stolen personal items to create false identities with unprecedented accuracy and completeness. The false identities included not just identification documents, but physical accessories, behavioral patterns, and personal details that allowed the perpetrators to successfully impersonate their targets in professional and social environments. We've documented cases where identity thieves have successfully impersonated robbery victims in business meetings, social events, and even family gatherings, Kim explained. They have access to information about the victims' personal lives, professional relationships, and social connections that goes far beyond what could be obtained through traditional surveillance. The connection between Foster's robbery grid pattern and Kim's identity theft investigation suggested a criminal operation of unprecedented scope and sophistication. The systematic robberies were providing the physical components needed for large-scale identity theft, while extensive surveillance operations were gathering the personal information needed to make the false identities convincing. Foster and Kim decided to collaborate unofficially, sharing information and coordinating their investigations, despite the lack of formal authorization from their respective supervisors. Their combined analysis revealed that the identity theft operations were being used to infiltrate financial institutions, technology companies, government agencies, and other organizations where access to sensitive information could be monetized or used for further criminal activities. This isn't traditional organized crime, Foster concluded. This is systematic infiltration of legitimate institutions using stolen identities. They're not just stealing money, they're stealing access to information, relationships, and positions of trust that can be leveraged for much larger criminal enterprises. The investigation reached a critical point when Foster discovered that several of the individuals whose identities had been stolen through the robbery operations had subsequently been arrested for crimes they insisted they hadn't committed. The false identity theft wasn't just being used to access institutions, it was being used to frame the original identity holders for criminal activities conducted by the thieves. They're not just stealing identities, Kim observed. They're destroying the lives of the people whose identities they've stolen by using those identities to commit additional crimes. Foster's analysis of arrest records revealed that at least 47 robbery victims had been subsequently arrested for financial crimes, cyber crimes, or other offenses that had actually been committed by individuals using their stolen identities. The robbery victims found themselves facing criminal charges for activities they hadn't conducted, in locations they had never visited, using skills and knowledge they didn't possess. The psychological and legal impact on the robbery victims was devastating. Many lost their jobs, their professional licenses, and their personal relationships as a result of criminal charges that stemmed from identity theft they didn't even know had occurred. The legal system struggled to distinguish between the actual victims and the criminals who had assumed their identities. Foster decided to contact one of the robbery victims who had been arrested for subsequent crimes, hoping to gather first-hand information about the identity theft process. Dr. Michael Torres, a cardiologist who had been robbed in October 2020 and arrested in January 2021 for medical insurance fraud, agreed to meet with Foster to discuss his experience. "I was robbed of my phone, briefcase, and watch while walking to dinner," Dr. Torres explained. 3 months later, I was arrested for filing fraudulent insurance claims using patient information I'd never seen, at medical facilities I'd never visited. The evidence against me included my own identification documents and personal items that had been stolen during the robbery. Dr. Torres's case revealed the sophisticated nature of the identity theft operation. The criminals hadn't just used his stolen items to access his financial accounts, they had used his medical credentials to establish a fraudulent practice, created false patient records, and filed insurance claims for services that had never been provided. The fraudulent activities were conducted with such attention to detail that investigators initially assumed Dr. Torres was lying about his innocence. They knew things about my medical background, my professional relationships, and my personal life that should have been impossible for strangers to discover, Dr. Torres continued. They conducted the fraudulent medical practice using my identity with such accuracy that colleagues and patients believed they were interacting with me. I'm still fighting criminal charges for crimes that someone else committed using my stolen identity. Foster's investigation revealed that Dr. Torres's experience was typical of the robbery victims who'd been targeted by the identity theft operations. In each case, the criminals had conducted extensive research on their targets before the robbery, gathering enough personal and professional information to successfully impersonate them for extended periods. The level of research required suggested that the criminal organization had access to databases, surveillance capabilities, and information gathering resources that rivaled those of law enforcement agencies. They were able to obtain personal information, professional credentials, and social connections that should have been protected by privacy laws and security protocols. Foster shared her findings with Detective Kim, and together they began to investigate how the criminal organization was obtaining such comprehensive information about their targets. Their analysis suggested that the organization had infiltrated multiple legitimate businesses, government agencies, and information services, using insider access to gather intelligence about potential robbery and identity theft targets. "This isn't just a criminal organization," Kim concluded. "This is a systematic infiltration of legitimate institutions that has created a parallel intelligence network capable of gathering detailed information about private citizens and using that information to facilitate large-scale criminal activities." The investigation took a dangerous turn when Foster discovered that several law enforcement officers had been targeted by the robbery operations. 3 detectives from different precincts had been robbed using the same grid pattern methodology, and their stolen identities had been used to access police databases, evidence storage facilities, and ongoing investigations. The infiltration of law enforcement through stolen identities explained how the criminal organization was able to conduct their operations with such precision and avoid detection. By using stolen police identities to access internal databases and investigative information, they could stay ahead of law enforcement efforts to identify and stop their activities. Foster realized that her own investigation might be compromised if criminals using stolen police identities had access to internal communications and investigation reports. She decided to conduct her investigation using secure external communications and to limit her documentation to personal devices that weren't connected to police networks. The paranoia proved justified when Foster discovered that her pattern recognition unit computer had been accessed remotely during off hours, with someone using legitimate administrative credentials to review her analysis files. The access logs showed that her investigation into the citywide robbery patterns had been monitored by someone with high-level access to NYPD computer systems. Foster reported the unauthorized access to internal affairs. but was told that the access had been authorized by Deputy Commissioner Chen as part of routine oversight of unit activities. Chen's explanation didn't address why the access had occurred during off hours, or why Foster hadn't been notified of the review. Suspecting that Chen might be involved in covering up the criminal organization's activities, Foster decided to investigate Chen's background and connections. What she discovered added a new layer of corruption to the already complex criminal conspiracy. Chen had financial connections to several companies that provided security consulting services to the same financial institutions and technology companies that had been infiltrated using stolen identities from the robbery operations. His consulting fees and stock holdings suggested that he had significant financial incentives to prevent law enforcement from identifying and stopping the identity theft operations. More troubling was Foster's discovery that Chen had been instrumental in establishing the pattern recognition unit, with specific parameters that limited its analysis to individual neighborhoods rather than citywide patterns. The unit's restricted mandate ensured that investigators would not identify the scope of the coordinated robbery operations. Chen designed the pattern recognition unit to prevent us from discovering what we actually discovered, Foster realized. He wanted crime analysis that would identify small-scale patterns without revealing the large-scale conspiracy that he's connected to. Foster decided that she needed to take her findings outside the NYPD, contacting the FBI's white-collar crime division to report the identity theft conspiracy and the potential corruption within the department. Special Agent Lisa Park, who specialized in large-scale financial crimes, agreed to meet with Foster to review her evidence. Agent Park's initial reaction to Foster's findings was skeptical, but as Foster presented her data analysis, surveillance observations, and documentation of the institutional infiltration, Park's expression shifted to serious concern. Detective Foster, what you're describing is a criminal enterprise that goes far beyond traditional organized crime, Park observed. This sounds like a sophisticated intelligence operation that uses criminal methods to infiltrate and manipulate legitimate institutions. The scope and coordination you've documented suggests involvement by actors with significant resources and professional intelligence capabilities. Park initiated a joint FBI-NYPD investigation, working with Foster to expand the analysis of the robbery patterns and identity theft operations. The federal investigation revealed that similar operations were active in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., suggesting a national criminal network with coordination capabilities that spanned multiple cities. The federal investigation also confirmed Foster's suspicions about corruption within the NYPD. Deputy Commissioner Chen and at least 6 other high-ranking officers had financial connections to companies that benefited from the criminal organization's activities. The corrupt officers had used their positions to limit investigation into the robbery patterns and to provide the criminal organization with advance warning about law enforcement activities. The case culminated in a coordinated raid on March 15, 2022, involving FBI agents, NYPD Internal Affairs investigators, and officers from multiple precincts who had been cleared of involvement in the corruption. The raids targeted 23 locations across the 5 boroughs, including apartments used by robbery crews, storage facilities containing stolen items, and offices where false identities were being processed. The raids resulted in 47 arrests, including Deputy Commissioner Chen and the 6 other corrupt officers. Seized evidence included detailed surveillance files on hundreds of potential robbery targets, sophisticated equipment for creating false identification documents, and financial records showing that the criminal organization had generated over $30 million through identity theft and institutional infiltration. Foster's role in exposing the conspiracy earned her commendation from both the NYPD and the FBI, but also placed her in a difficult position within the department. Many of her colleagues viewed her investigation of a superior officer as a betrayal of departmental loyalty, while others questioned whether additional corruption might exist within their ranks. Discovering that criminal conspiracy was one thing, Foster reflected in her final report. Discovering that it was being protected by corruption within our own department was something else entirely. It made me question everything I thought I knew about the people I work with and the institution I've dedicated my career to serving. The Pattern Recognition Unit was disbanded following Chen's arrest, with its analytical functions transferred to existing investigative units under new oversight protocols. Foster was promoted to Detective First Grade and assigned to a joint FBI-NYPD task force focused on identifying and preventing similar large-scale criminal enterprises. The investigation revealed that 1,247 robberies over an 18-month period had been part of the coordinated identity theft operation, affecting over 1,200 victims who had lost not just their personal property, but their identities, their reputations, and in many cases their livelihoods. The systematic nature of the crimes had been obscured by their distribution across multiple precincts, and the corruption that prevented comprehensive analysis of the crime patterns. For the victims of the robbery and identity theft operations, recovery has been a long and difficult process. Many continue to face legal challenges related to crimes committed by others using their stolen identities, while others struggle to rebuild professional relationships and financial standing that were damaged by criminal activities they didn't commit. Dr. Torres, whose case had helped Foster understand the scope of the identity theft operations, eventually had all charges dropped after the federal investigation proved his innocence. However, he was forced to close his medical practice and relocate to another state to escape the professional reputation damage caused by the fraudulent activities conducted using his stolen identity. The robbery took my phone, my briefcase, and my watch, Dr. Torres stated in a victim impact statement. But the identity theft took my career, my relationships, and my faith in the systems that are supposed to protect citizens from exactly this kind of victimization. The criminal organization that conducted the systematic robbery and identity theft operations has never been fully identified. While the arrests in New York disrupted their activities in the city, federal investigators believe that similar operations continue in other locations using the same methodologies and organizational principles. Foster continues to work with federal investigators to identify and prevent similar criminal enterprises, using the analytical method she developed in the Pattern Recognition Unit to identify patterns that suggest systematic criminal coordination. Her work has contributed to new protocols for cross-jurisdictional crime analysis and has influenced training programs for law enforcement analysts nationwide. The most important thing I learned from this case, Foster concluded in her testimony before a congressional committee investigating organized crime, is that criminals can be more organized, more systematic, and more sophisticated than we give them credit for. When we limit our analysis to individual incidents or small geographic areas, we miss the larger patterns that reveal the true scope of criminal enterprises. Modern criminals understand that our investigative methods are compartmentalized, and they use that knowledge to conduct large-scale operations that remain invisible to traditional law enforcement approaches. The pattern recognition case has become a standard example in law enforcement training programs of how modern criminal organizations can exploit the boundaries between different investigative units and jurisdictions to conduct systematic criminal activities that remain undetected for extended periods. It demonstrates the importance of comprehensive crime analysis and the dangers of corruption that can prevent effective investigation of sophisticated criminal enterprises. For the NYPD, the case resulted in significant reforms to oversight protocols, investigative coordination, and corruption prevention measures. The department implemented new requirements for cross-unit information sharing, and established independent oversight of analytical units to prevent the kind of corruption that had protected the criminal organization for 18 months. The systematic grid pattern that Foster discovered continues to be studied by criminologists and law enforcement analysts as an example of how mathematical precision can be applied to criminal activities. The level of organization and coordination required to conduct 1,247 robberies following geometric patterns while maintaining operational security represents a new category of criminal enterprise that challenges traditional assumptions about the capabilities and sophistication of organized crime. In her final interview before retiring from active investigation to focus on training and education, Foster reflected on the broader implications of the case. We've always assumed that criminals are reactive, opportunistic, and disorganized compared to law enforcement. This case taught me that we can't afford to make those assumptions anymore. Modern criminal organizations can be as systematic, as analytical, and as technologically sophisticated as any legitimate institution. If we're going to protect people from these kinds of enterprises, we need to be more systematic and more analytical than they are. Detective Ray Castellanos discovered the discrepancy on a Tuesday morning in November 2018, buried in the routine quarterly audit of the Chicago Police Department's 14th District Evidence Storage Facility. As the district's property and evidence manager, Ray had conducted dozens of these audits over his 12-year career, and they typically yielded nothing more exciting than paperwork errors and the occasional misfiled item. But as he compared physical inventory against digital records in Section C7 of the evidence warehouse, he found something that stopped him cold. A gap in the numbering system that shouldn't exist. Evidence items were cataloged sequentially, with no breaks in the numerical progression. Every item received a unique identifier, CPD-14, followed by the year and an ascending number. The system was designed to prevent gaps, ensuring that no evidence could be removed without leaving a digital footprint. Yet there in Section C7, between items CPD-14-2018-4721 and CPD-14-2018-4723, was a missing number, CPD-14-2018-4722. Ray's first assumption was a simple database error. Someone had skipped a number during data entry, or an item had been misfiled. But when he searched the digital system, CPD 14-2018-4722 did exist in the database. It was listed as a single cardboard evidence box containing personal effects from traffic fatality, logged in on August 17, 2018. The problem was that no such box existed in the physical storage facility. According to the digital record, CPD 14-2018-4722 should have been on shelf C-7-15, between a box of drug evidence from a narcotics arrest and clothing items from an assault case. Ray found the shelf, found the neighboring items exactly where they should be, but found empty space where CPD 14-2018-4722 should have been stored. More puzzling was the digital trail. The system showed that the missing box had been accessed 17 times since being logged into evidence, checked out for court proceedings, reviewed by detectives, and returned to storage in accordance with standard protocols. Each access was properly documented with digital signatures, timestamps, and authorization codes. According to the database, the box had been returned to storage just 3 days earlier, following a review by Detective Maria Santos in connection with an ongoing investigation. Ray called Detective Santos, expecting to find that she still had the box or had transferred it to another location. Santos's response added a new layer of confusion to the situation. "I haven't checked out any evidence boxes this week," Santos said. And I've never worked a traffic fatality involving personal effects. That's not even my division. I'm in burglary theft. When Ray read her the digital authorization code used to check out the box, Santos confirmed it was indeed her code, but insisted she had never used it for this purpose. Ray spent the rest of the day tracking down the 17 people whose digital signatures appeared in the access log for CPD 14 2018 4722. In every case, the officers and detectives insisted they had never checked out the box and had no knowledge of the case it supposedly related to. Yet their digital signatures and authorization codes were all authentic, verified through the department's security protocols and matching their documented access patterns for other evidence items. It's like the box is checking itself out, Ray muttered, reviewing the access logs for the third time. The timestamps showed regular activity. The missing box was being accessed more frequently than most items in storage, handled by officers who insisted they'd never seen it, for a case that no one could identify. Ray's next step was to investigate the original case that had generated the evidence box. According to the database, CPD 14 2018 4722 contained personal effects from a traffic fatality that occurred on August 17, 2018, at the intersection of Western Avenue and 47th Street. The responding officers were listed as patrol officers Kevin Park and Jennifer Wu, with Detective Carlos Mendez handling the follow-up investigation. Ray pulled the case file for the August 17th incident, finding a routine traffic accident report. A pedestrian named Marcus Powell, 34, had been struck and killed by a delivery truck while crossing Western Avenue. The driver, later determined to be sober and not at fault, had been unable to avoid the collision when Powell suddenly entered the roadway. The case was closed after a brief investigation determined that no criminal charges were warranted. But according to the file, no personal effects had been collected from the scene. Powell's body had been transported directly to the county morgue, and the only evidence collected was vehicle debris and photographs. Officers Park and Wu had specifically noted in their report that the victim carried no identification, wallet, or personal items. His identity was established through fingerprints obtained during the autopsy. Ray contacted Detective Mendez, who remembered the case clearly. Simple traffic fatality, Mendez confirmed. Victim had nothing on him, no wallet, no phone, no jewelry, nothing to collect as evidence. I remember thinking it was unusual for someone to be walking around completely empty-handed, but it wasn't suspicious. Just sad. Yet the evidence database insisted that a box of Marcus Powell's personal effects existed, had been properly cataloged, and was being regularly accessed by officers who denied any knowledge of it. Ray decided to expand his investigation, checking whether similar discrepancies existed elsewhere in the evidence system. What he discovered over the following week transformed his simple audit into something far more disturbing. The evidence database contained 127 items that existed digitally but not physically, all listed as personal effects from traffic fatalities, all logged in over the past 18 months, all showing regular access by officers who insisted they had never checked them out. More troubling was the pattern of the missing items. Everyone corresponded to a traffic fatality where the victim had been found with no personal effects, no identification, no wallet, no phone, no jewelry. In each case, the responding officers had specifically noted the absence of personal items. Yet the evidence database insisted that such items had been collected and stored. Ray brought his findings to Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, head of the 14th District's Property and Evidence Division. Martinez's initial reaction was that they were dealing with a sophisticated theft operation. Someone with access to the evidence database was creating false records to cover the theft of valuable items. But this theory collapsed when they realized that none of the allegedly stolen items had any monetary value. The missing evidence consisted entirely of personal effects from pedestrians who, by all accounts, had carried no personal effects. "Why would someone steal things that don't exist?" Martinez asked, reviewing Ray's findings. "And why would they create false access logs showing officers who deny ever being involved?" The investigation expanded to include the department's IT division. System Administrator Lisa Park, no relation to Officer Kevin Park, conducted a comprehensive forensic analysis of the evidence database, looking for signs of hacking, data corruption, or unauthorized access. Her findings were more disturbing than the original discrepancy. "The database isn't being hacked," Park reported. "These records are being generated by the system itself, following normal protocols. Someone, or something with legitimate access, is creating these entries, but they're doing it in a way that suggests they have comprehensive knowledge of your internal procedures and officer schedules." Park's analysis revealed that the false evidence records were being created during routine database maintenance windows, periods when the system was temporarily offline for updates and backups. During these windows, which occurred every Tuesday night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., new records were being inserted into the database with backdated creation timestamps, making them appear to have been entered months earlier. "Whoever is doing this has administrative access to your evidence system," Park explained. "They understand your numbering system, your storage procedures, and your officer assignment patterns well enough to create records that look completely legitimate. But they're creating records for evidence that doesn't exist, related to cases where such evidence was never collected." Lieutenant Martinez ordered a review of all personnel with administrative access to the evidence database. The list was short: Ray Castellanos, Martinez herself, Property Room Supervisor Janet Coleman, and IT Administrator Lisa Park. None of them had been working during the Tuesday night maintenance windows when the false records were being created. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Ray decided to visit the specific locations where the non-existent evidence was supposedly being stored. Starting with the missing box CPD 14-2018-4722, he went to shelf C-7-15, where the system insisted it should be located. What he found challenged his understanding of the entire situation. The shelf space where the box should have been stored was not simply empty. It was configured as if a box-sized item had been stored there. The shelf showed an indentation in the dust pattern consistent with a cardboard evidence box. The items on either side were positioned as they would be if they had been moved aside to accommodate a box. Most unsettling, when Ray measured the space, it was exactly the right size for a standard evidence storage box. Ray tested this observation by visiting other locations where non-existent evidence was supposedly stored. In every case, he found similar evidence of phantom storage: dust patterns, positioning of adjacent items, even wear marks on shelves that suggested boxes had been regularly removed and replaced. The physical storage facility showed clear signs that items existed in these locations, even though no items were visible. This discovery led Ray to a disturbing hypothesis. What if the evidence did exist, but was somehow invisible or intangible? What if the regular access logs reflected real checkouts of real items that could be handled by some people, but not seen by others? To test this theory, Ray arranged to observe one of the scheduled checkouts. According to the database, CPD 14-2018-4722 was scheduled to be checked out by Detective Santos on Thursday, November 15th, at 2:30 p.m. Santos had again insisted she had no plans to check out any evidence that day and had never worked the case in question. At 2:30 p.m., Ray positioned himself in the evidence storage facility to observe shelf C, 715. Santos did not appear. No one entered the storage area. But at exactly 2:30 p.m., the database logged a successful checkout of CPD 14-2018-4722 to Detective Santos, complete with her digital signature and authorization code. Even more disturbing, when Ray examined the shelf after the logged checkout, the dust pattern had changed. The indentation where the box had supposedly been stored was gone, as if someone had indeed removed a box from that location. Ray immediately called Santos, finding her at her desk in the burglary division. She insisted she had been working on case files all afternoon and had not left her desk. Security footage confirmed that Santos had not visited the evidence storage facility that day. Yet the database insisted she had checked out the non-existent box, and the physical evidence suggested something had indeed been removed from the shelf. The case reached a crisis point when Ray discovered that the phantom evidence items were being used in actual court proceedings. A search of court records revealed that CPD 14-2018, 4722, and 12 other non-existent evidence items had been submitted as exhibits in various legal proceedings over the past 6 months. In each case, attorneys, judges, and court officials had documented handling and examining the evidence items that Ray knew did not physically exist. Ray attended one of these court sessions, a civil proceeding where CPD 14-2018-4722 was scheduled to be presented as evidence. He watched as the prosecuting attorney approached the evidence table, handled what appeared to be an empty space, and presented it to the jury as the victim's personal effects recovered from the scene. The jury members nodded, as if they could see the evidence Ray knew wasn't there. The judge made notes about the evidence's relevance to the case. Only Ray seemed unable to see what everyone else in the courtroom was seeing. Dr. Marcus Chen, a forensic psychologist specializing in perception disorders, was brought in to evaluate Ray's condition. Chen's initial assessment suggested that Ray might be suffering from a rare neurological condition affecting his ability to perceive certain visual stimuli, but comprehensive medical testing found no physical or psychological abnormalities that could explain Ray's inability to see evidence that others consistently reported handling. Detective Castellanos appears to be neurologically and psychologically normal, Dr. Chen reported. His inability to perceive these evidence items cannot be explained by any known medical condition. This suggests either that the items exist in some way that defies normal perception, or that everyone else involved is experiencing a shared delusion of remarkable consistency and detail. The shared delusion theory gained support when Dr. Chen interviewed other personnel involved in handling the phantom evidence. Each person provided detailed, consistent descriptions of the missing items, despite the fact that no such items had ever been collected or cataloged. They described Marcus Powell's wallet, containing $23 in cash and a disabled transit card, a cell phone, an older model with a cracked screen, and a wristwatch, analog with a black leather strap and a stopped mechanism. These descriptions were remarkably specific and consistent across multiple witnesses, yet they described items that had demonstrably not been collected from Powell's body. The responding officers had specifically documented that Powell carried no personal effects, and the medical examiner had confirmed this observation. What we're seeing, Dr. Chen concluded, is either a collective false memory involving dozens of law enforcement and court personnel, or we're dealing with evidence that exists in some state that Detective Castellanos cannot perceive, but that appears real and consistent to everyone else involved. The investigation reached its conclusion when Ray made a decision that would end his career in law enforcement. Unable to reconcile the discrepancy between what the database recorded, what his colleagues reported, and what he could physically observe, Ray broke into the evidence storage facility after hours to conduct his own experiment. Using a video camera, Ray recorded himself searching shelf C715 for CPD-14, 2018-4722. The recording clearly showed him reaching into an empty space, finding nothing, and confirming that no box was present. But when he reviewed the footage the next morning, the video showed him handling a cardboard evidence box, examining its contents, and returning it to the shelf. According to the video evidence Ray had shot himself, the box existed and contained exactly the items other witnesses had described: Marcus Powell's wallet, phone, and wristwatch. The video showed Ray handling these items, examining them, and even reading aloud from cards in Powell's wallet, words that did not appear on the audio track Ray remembered recording. "I either filmed myself handling evidence I couldn't see," Ray wrote in his final report, "or the recording equipment captured something that wasn't there. Either way, I can no longer trust my own perceptions enough to continue working in law enforcement." Ray submitted his resignation on November 30th, 2018. His final report recommended a complete audit of the evidence database and additional psychological evaluations for all personnel involved in evidence handling. The department accepted his resignation and implemented new protocols for evidence verification, but the phantom evidence items remained in the database, continued to be regularly accessed, and continued to be used in court proceedings. Lieutenant Martinez, who took over Ray's responsibilities, found herself able to see and handle the evidence items that Ray had been unable to perceive. In her notes, she wrote, "CPD 14-2018-4722 appears to be a standard evidence box containing personal effects consistent with database records. Detective Castellanos' inability to perceive these items remains unexplained, but does not appear to indicate any systematic problems with evidence storage or database integrity. Dr. Chen's ongoing research into Ray's case has contributed to new understanding of perception-based evidence handling issues in law enforcement. His work suggests that certain individuals may be neurologically incapable of perceiving evidence related to specific types of traumatic events, a condition he terms selective evidence blindness. For Ray Castellanos, the case represents a fundamental break with reality that he has never been able to reconcile. In a follow-up interview 6 months after his resignation, he stated, "I spent 12 years as a cop, handling evidence, processing crime scenes, dealing with facts and physical proof. But those evidence boxes taught me that reality isn't as solid as we like to think. If I can't see something that everyone else insists is there, if my own video camera records me handling things I know I never touched, then what else might I be missing? What else might be there, right in front of me, that I just can't see?" The phantom evidence items remain active in the Chicago Police Department's database, regularly accessed and used in court proceedings. The shelves where Ray could never see them continue to show signs of regular use, and dozens of law enforcement and court personnel continue to handle and examine items that, by all logical analysis, should not exist. Marcus Powell's personal effects, the wallet, phone, and watch that were never found on his body, sit in evidence storage, cataloged and accessible, visible to everyone except the one man whose job was to keep track of them. And somewhere in that discrepancy between what should be and what is, between what one person can see and what everyone else perceives, lies a mystery that challenges the fundamental assumptions of evidence, perception, and reality in modern law enforcement.